breath that turns to glass. Close your eyes for a second and do a quick inventory. Warm room, working heater, maybe a mug on the nightstand that still smells like cocoa or tea. Good. Now strip all of that away. No thermostat. No hum of appliances. No backup anything. It's 1885 on the Dakota Prairie, and the first thing you notice isn't darkness. It's pain. Your eyelashes are glued together by ice. You pry them apart with fingers that barely respond, and the simple act of blinking feels like breaking sugar glass. Your breath fogs in a tiny cloud above your mouth, then crystallizes. In the air, a constellation that sifts downward onto your blanket. A tear tries to form at the corner of your eye and freezes mid-journey. Not poetic, literal, ma. The buckets are rock again. A small voice whispers from the floor. In this cabin, words are rationed like fuel. Your mother answers without lifting her head when there's light. She doesn't say when it's warmer, because it won't be. Dawn here is a rumor that comes with wind. You're lying under everything your family owns, quilts, coats, a shawl that smells faintly of smoke, even a grain sack for another layer, and the cold still presses through, a steady weight. The corn husk mattress crackles when you shift. Ropes under the straw sag into a valley that gathers everyone together whether you like one another or not. A chicken clucks from somewhere in the dark. The dog is a curled comma at your feet, radiating a small sun. The cabin snaps as the gale hits it. Out on the prairie, wind doesn't just blow. It punishes. It finds the nail hole you missed, the gap you swore you'd plug tomorrow, the knot in the plank that shrunk after the first hard freeze. The walls answer with their own language moans, little popping sounds, a shiver that travels the structure like a rumor traveling town to town. You learn quickly that winter here is not a season. It is an occupation. It invades your hours, your decisions, your conversations. You stop saying, "I'll run outside," because you won't. You plan trips like military campaigns, layers, routes, contingencies, a rope if the sky goes white and eats the trail. You measure life in cords of fuel, in jars sealed right and sacks tied tight, in the inches of packed earth between the wind and your bones. The rulebook is simple and merciless. Talk less. Warm air is precious. Don't sweat. Wet cotton is a death sentence. Keep the fire banked at night, or wake to a house that's more crypt than home. Never walk between buildings without a line or a landmark you can touch blind. Never trust a mild morning. A storm can drop out of a blue sky so fast you'll swear. You heard it coming like a train, then your world is a white wall. Your eyes feel needled, and the distance between house and barn becomes an act of faith. A scrape, then a hiss. Your father is coaxing last night's banked coals back to life. He moves like a locksmith, patient and exact. A pinch of ash off, a breath, a curl of smoke, the smallest sticks first, then the kindling that he shaved by. Lantern 2 nights ago, mistime it and you smother the ember. Rush it and you waste fuel. He doesn't rush anything in January. Fuel, that's the mathematics that hums behind every winter sound. Wood is rare, out here trees don't grow tall when the sky wants them dead. So your family burns what the land can spare. Dry grass twisted into knots, corn cobs from the harvest, and yes, the thing polite people don't say until they live long enough out here to stop being polite. Chips. Buffalo when you could find them on the ground by the old trails, then cow chips as the herds vanished. You learned to feel the good ones in your hands, the firm, silty pucks that break clean, the ones that burn hot and surprisingly clean. Hilarious. To the uninitiated, life-saving to everyone else. Don't kid yourself. The old neighbor told you the week you arrived, when your coat still smelled like a city. You'll thank a bison's backside before March. He wasn't wrong. There's a strange kind of holiness and fire that runs on grass twice first, through the animal, then through your stove. As the flame wakes, the cabin changes character. Not warmed of a way your future grandchildren will recognize, but less fatal. The circle near the stove becomes coveted territory. Families invent elaborate ways to share it. 10 minutes close, 10 minutes back, rotate. Children upstairs. In the loft because heat climbs. Parents below because they can take the cold better and because they need to be near the fire if it falters. Quilts hang as makeshift walls to trap warmth in smaller pockets. A pot goes on. Cornmeal mush, if you have it. Dried apple, if it survived. The mice, you think of the first autumn out here, the panic hidden under chores. How your mother's eyes did math while her hands worked, counting jars, counting sacks, counting mouths. How the days shortened and the list lengthened. How you stuffed rags into wall cracks until your fingers bled. How you built a windbreak from sod and brush on the north side because a Dakota man shook his head at your East Coast instincts and gently turned your door toward the sun. How you learned to love ugly. Thick walls, low ceilings, tiny windows, a vestibule that acts like an airlock. A pretty house is a coffin with trim. Outside, the wind writes long sentences in the snow. Inside, small rituals feel like defiance. Your warm stones near the stove, the dense black ones that don't explode when heated, and slide them into the bed's foot before night. You keep a canary by the stove, not a pet, a sentinel. If it stirs oddly, you crack a vent and live too. Be cold another day. You sleep with your boots near the heat, because footwear left in the entry stiffens into sculpture by morning. You save a rope with a loop in it, big enough for little hands, because stepping into the white without a tether is gambling with a dealer who never loses. You don't trust eyes, you trust touch. One palm along the log wall to the door, one on the boy's shoulder, your breath steady so your scarf doesn't ice. The old man in town taught you how to count steps to the barn 52 if the drifts are low, 70 when they're high, more when the wind rearranges the world at night. He also taught you the chant you pretend is for the children, but is really for yourself. In by the wall, out by the rope. Hands, feet, face move, or you don't. What about school? Someone asks in a different time, in a warmer room. You remember the story that ran through every settlement like a wire humming with current. A warm morning that turned midday to knives. A roof blown clear. A teacher with rope and courage and the kind of arithmetic you learn on the prairie. 17 children, 1 line, 1 chance. Newspapers 2 states away printed her name like a hymn. Other names didn't make it to ink. Out here, winter doesn't care about headlines. The dog thumps his tail once. Your father lifts the pot lid and nods. Heat makes the cabin smell like hope. Your mother finally sits up, hair haloed with frost. She puts her feet into boots that have known too much water and too much salt and too many nights dried near flame. Eat, she says, because lectures waste warmth, but orders conserve it. You do. The bite is plain and perfect. It tastes like survival, and still the line is razor thin. A chimney clogs no draftan smoke curls down into the room. 1 cough becomes 5, becomes heads too heavy to lift. A stove scene fails, and a colorless, odorless thing takes your whole family out in their sleep. A man misjudges distance by 10 steps and sits to rest a moment in the wrong kind of cold. You learn to fear ease more than effort, silence more than wind. You learn that the body lies to you when it's losing. It says, just close your eyes, just a minute. You answer, stand up, count, move. What the prairie takes with one hand, it offers with the other, but you only see it if pride loosens its grip. Pride builds a New England house on a treeless sea and calls it civilization. Wisdom stacks earth into walls 2 to 3 feet thick and calls it home. Pride laughs at moccasins and fur-lined mittens. Wisdom checks its fingers in February and changes its mind. Pride thinks more windows mean more light. Wisdom learns that light can cost life in January and adjusts one small pane. Placed south, with a quilt ready to drop across it when the wind starts to pry. By mid-morning, the sky brightens from black to pewter. You hear the soft, uncanny creak of sun finding a frozen world. The bucket still holds a sculpture where water should be. Your sister taps it with the ladle and smiles. At the belltone it makes. Even in siege, humans will find music. Your father sets down his tin cup. Barn, he says. One word, the operation begins. Layers on layers wool next to skin, then more wool, then leather to trap the wind. A scarf wound in a way that lets breath escape without turning the fabric into armor of ice. Mittens, not gloves. Fingers together keep faith with each other better than alone. He takes a coil of rope and ties it at the door, loops it twice around his wrist, checks the knot, like he's checking a child's pulse. You open the door. The first breath outside is a fist. The second is a promise you make to yourself without words, there and back. The third you don't count, because the world narrows to white and sound, the hiss and roar, and the insane, bright squeak of snow that's too cold to be what you thought snow was. He leans into it. You keep your palm on the wall, then the rope, then his shoulder. Somewhere ahead, living things wait for you 2 cows that turn hay into milk and heat. A horse that is a tractor before tractors, chickens that lay warm ovals. In a world of edges, their lives are braided into yours, and the braid holds 1,000 small knots named February. Later, after the chore's done, after you've traced the line back to the door, after you've stomped ice from your scarf and thawed your eyebrows by blinking in the stoves, glow, sit with a pencil stub and draw a better door. A thicker wall, an airlock like the neighbors, a snow fence to tame the drifts, a covered run to the barn so you never have to trust a rope alone again. That's how the frontier teaches, with cold and correction. You learn, or you pay. The day will pass in work you don't name heroic because the prairie has no patience for romance in January. You'll twist grass into fuel and check the root cellar and turn the jars so brine keeps what it should. You'll count, always count. Matches left, flour left, weeks left, courage left. And when night drifts down early, as it always does in a place this far from gentle, you'll do the last sacred task, bank the fire, ash over, ember the small red heart of the house tucked in to smoulder till morning. You'll listen to the wind pick another fight with the walls. You'll feel the dog curl back into his comma. You'll stack your hands under your cheek and promise yourself the same promise your parents made and their neighbors made and that teacher made with a length of rope and 17 small hands in hers. We'll see spring, not by luck, by design. Tomorrow we build the house, not as a dwelling, but as a survival tool. Thick earth, smart openings, and tricks the wind still hasn't learned how to beat. Asterisk, the house is a weapon picture, the wind as a living thing, mean, clever, and patient. It has a key to every careless gap and a grudge against pretty houses. Out here, a clapboard cottage with lace curtains is less a home and more a wooden apology to the weather. On the prairie, your house must fight back. You learned that the first November, the gale shouldered the door until the latch squealed. Candle flames tilted flat, horizontal as if trying to escape. Frost bloomed along nail heads and between floorboards, like a map of your mistakes. You hung quilts on the walls and stuffed rags into the cracks. The cold only grew quiet and smiled. The families who made it to spring didn't build for charm. They built for physics. They learned to turn dirt into armor, wind into a manageable nuisance, and space into a controlled climate. They stopped, asking the prairie to behave, and started designing a house that could survive it. Start with the wall, not a stick, wall and earth, wall. Sod cut in heavy bricks, roots in grass side down, stacked like a giant child's toy until the sides are 2, sometimes 3 feet thick, ugly, often damp, sometimes effective, absolutely. The sod wall is a thermal flywheel, slow to warm, slow to cool, to stubborn to surrender. You press your palm to it at 20 below and it's merely cold, not killing. Heat it a little and it holds that gift for hours. But thickness alone won't save you if the wind knows your name. Orientation is your first, cheapest miracle. Face the door south or southeast, where winter sun can find it and prevailing northwest winds cannot. Turn a pretty gable toward the gale and you've built a sail. Tuck your house into the land against a low rise or a line of scrubs, so the earth itself sips the wind before it drinks you. Bank soil up along the north wall until your house wears the prairie like a blanket. If you have to pick one luxury, pick a vestibule. Call it a mudroom, an airlock, a buffer, whatever your tongue prefers. It is a small box between outdoors and in, where cold can lose speed before it barges through. Your living room. Teach the children to close one door before they open the other. In January, manners are mechanics. Windows. Think like a miser. Every pane is an agreement to let the wind take a little heat tax. 1 or 2 small south-facing lights for sun, set deep in their openings. In storms, quilts drop over them like eyelids. Old-timers learned to glaze with oil or even stretch oiled. Cloth when glass was scarce, not because it's pretty, but because it keeps moving air from moving through you. Inside, the stove sits where a heart would sit, center mass. Not against an outside wall where heat leaks into the forever night, but in the middle, radiating in all directions. Everything you love should orbit that stovework table. Sleeping platforms, chairs that migrate like animals following a watering hole. Build a loft above it if you can. Heat rises, and children sleep easiest where warmth pools. Parents stay below, closer to the coals and the midnight checks that keep a house from becoming a warning story. You partition the room with quilts on lines, creating smaller climates you can actually heat. A corner for the youngest with a low canopy to trap breath-warm air. A corner for food prep where hands don't go numb while cutting. A corner for chores that can't wait, mending, whittling, tinder, setting traps, oiling leather until it drinks its fill and turns supple again. Space, out here, isn't square footage. It's temperature gradients you can control. The roof matters more than anyone who's never seen a real drift could guess. A low pitch invites snow to settle and insulate. To low and you invite collapse. A steeper pitch sheds snow but steals your attic heat with it. If you're working with sod, a timber lattice under the blocks is your insurance-scavenged cottonwood, river driftwood, any straight lengths you can coax into a truss. When storms stack snow higher than a man's shoulder, that lattice is what keeps the night above your face instead of on it. Moisture is your subtle enemy, the patient cousin of wind. Where breath meets cold surface, you get rime. Rime becomes drip. Drip becomes rot. A pair of vent pipes, one low, one high gives the cabin lungs. In fair weather, you open them and let the house exhale. In killing cold, you crack them just enough so smoke never thinks about coming back down. The good neighbors even tack loose screens over their vent tops before storms so blown snow filters and falls, rather than packing the pipe shut like a cork-dot floor. Dirt takes and gives heat more gently than boards hung in air, but it also drinks, spills, and harbors cold damp. If you can manage it, tamp the earth until it's hard as resolve and lay a plank platform near the stove for sleeping. Cold settles low. Bodies should not. A foot of height can be a few degrees, and a few degrees can be a few toes. Now imagine the barn not as a separate building, but as a partner. The family that cut a covered passage from house to livestock discovered a winter cheat code. The cow is a furnace that eats hay. The horse is a radiator with hooves. A shared wall properly sealed to keep the stink manageable bleeds animal heat into the human room and keeps the water bucket liquid for an hour longer. Is it pleasant? No. Is it survival? Yes. You can air a house out in April. You can't negotiate with February. Let's make this real with a house you can walk through with your mind. The Wallace place learned the hard lesson their first year. Pretty windows, painted trim, candle, flames nailed sideways by wind. They nearly didn't see spring. The second summer, they dug and stacked and turned humility into architecture. Stand at their south-facing door, a heavy plank, leather gasket tacked along its frame, latch that bites like a jaw. Step into the vestibule, boots left on pegs, a bench with a hole bored through its lid to hold a warming stone. One more door, heavier still. Inside, the stove glows handful red. Quilts make rooms where there is only one room. The loft ladder is stout and slightly warm under your palm. A single small window sits in a deep reveal, and a quilt above it is tied back with a loop of cord. Ready to drop, dot. Run your knuckles along the north wall and they come away chalked with a whisper of frost. That's the wall doing its job, catching the wet before it enters your lungs. The floor near the stove is planked. Farther out, tamped earth, bruised smooth by a winter of footsteps. On a peg, a scarf stiff with yesterday's breath on a shelf. A canary's cage, not for singing, for warning. In the corner, under a canopy of pieced fabric, 2 children sleep in the warmth lake you've created with geometry and stubbornness. Open the interior door to the passage and the air changes. Warmer than you'd expect, ranker than you'd choose. The mud-spattered boards are ridged, so a boot finds purchase when you return half-blind in a whiteout. The barn beyond murmurs anemal sounds that in this season feel like a lullaby. At the far end, a crooked frame holds a second door with iron hooks for a rope. In a storm, you clip in and become a bead on a line instead of a body in a headline. The Wallace roof tells its own story. A snow fence staked windward throws the drift line forward, so the roof bears a blanket, not a boulder. Meltwater runs to a small trough and out, instead of falling through the ceiling onto your blankets as a nightly insult. Someone thought, tested, adjusted, The house doesn't look proud. It looks practiced. And yes, pride took a beating here. The neighbor who mocked dirt houses spent the hard winter burning chair legs in a clapboard box he loved for its looks. The neighbor who asked a Lakota elder to walk his site lives to thank him each spring. The elder taught him the logic of a teepee, how it meets wind with curve instead of corner, how the smoke wants a path and the sleeping wants a circle. The settler couldn't build a teepee from sod, but he stole the principles without shame. Airflow, shape, respect for winds, habits, asterisk. The design spills into daily choreography. You keep a hot zone rotation around the stove so everyone gets skin to bone heat at least twice each hour. You stow every critical object in the same place. Every time matches the good knife. The vent rod, because fumbling in the dark steals heat and hope. You practice the barn walk in fair weather with eyes closed. You trace the wall, find the knots, count the steps. Learn the turn where the passage begins so your hands can do it when your eyes are snowed shut. You rehearse safety like Sunday. Hymns. Nothing in this house is ornamental if it can be weaponized. A quilt is a door, a wall, a cloak. A bench is storage, a seat, a step, a shield against drafts when tipped on its side. A bucket is for water, then for ice. Then for catching the roof's inconvenient melt before it becomes a floor's destructive seep. You learn to look at objects as verbs, not nouns. What can this do? What else can it do when February strips? Our options? There are failures, and the house absorbs those lessons too. The night the chimney clogged and smoke put your family on the floor with headaches like hammers, you added a second, higher vent and a wire hood that laughs at snow. The morning the door froze shut in a crystal collar. You mounted a second latch, you can reach through a small cutout to chip it free. The day the drift buried the window, you learned the value of a candle shelf near the ceiling to watch for problems you can't see from the floor. By late winter, the house feels less like a building and more like a learned skill. You don't live in it so much as perform it. Every hinge has a routine. Every leak has a plan. Every corner has an intention. You've turned shelter into a system, into something that stacks small 5% advantages until they equal survival. And when spring finally scuffs a green line along the ditch, your house stands there ruggedly, stubborn, victorious, waiting for you to patch what failed and praise what worked. Tomorrow we move to the second half of the equation. Walls hold the cold out. Fire holds the cold off. Out here, where trees are stories and wood is wealth, we'll build heat out of grass and stone, bank it like money, carry it in mittens, and respect it like a loaded tool. The house can keep you from dying fast. The fire will keep you from dying slow. Asterisk fire that doesn't care about feelings. How here, the house keeps the wind from killing you fast. The fire keeps the cold from killing you slow. It's the heartbeat you build with your hands each morning, the small red sun you tend at night. Treat it like a pet and it'll wander off. Treat it like a tool and it might carry you to spring. Listen, the stove is ticking metal, contracting and expanding as it wakes. Your father crouches with the practiced patience of a watchmaker. He doesn't light a fire, he stages a rescue. First he pulls yesterday's ash forward, hunting for a thumb-sized coal that still answers with a dull orange when he cups it in the half-light. If he finds one, the day comes easier. If he doesn't, the day demands debt, more tinder, more breath, more mistakes to avoid. He cracks the ash blanket as if he's lifting a quilt from a sleeping child. A pinch off, a breath. Not a blow blowing scatters heat and hope. A breath is tighter, focused, like he's whispering into a keyhole. He feeds the ember dry shavings he carved last night by lantern, curls of wood thin as onion skin, laid crochetched so air can work. The smoke wants to pour into the room, of course, it does. Outside is a beast, but he has a trick for that, too. He burns a twist of paper near the flue first, warming the column so the chimney learns to pull before the fire really speaks. When the curl of flame shows its teeth, he adds the day's fuel, whatever this land can be convinced to surrender. On the prairie, trees are stories people tell, not resources you can count. So you burn the things that grew where trees wouldn't. Twisted prairie grass tied into knots that behave like little logs. Corn cobs from fall that hiss and then glow. And the chips let's not pretend we're too proud to say it. Buffalo when the land still offered them under the open sky. Cow once the herds moved on and fences arrived. Dried right, stacked right, they burn hot and almost clean, the smoke more suggestion than accusation. The first time you see it, your city brain rebels. By the 3rd February, you're sorting them by weight and learning which ones heat a room, and which ones pretend fuel becomes arithmetic. You don't have some. You have 3 baskets of knots, a sack of cobs, 2 stacks of chips under a board to keep them off the floors damp, and a small cache of driftwood you hauled from. The river last fall with a gratitude that felt like prayer. Every morning you count the pile without moving your lips, and the number hangs in your mind all day like a second horizon line. Your mother rations heat the way she rations flour. Mornings get a decent burn to thaw fingers and make mush. Midday drops to a stubborn glow enough to keep the water from turning to sculpture in the bucket. Evening builds to generosity. Cooking, drying mittens, lighting faces. Night gets the ritual that keeps you alive. Banking looks like laziness until you see what it wins. When the chores are done and the children's breathing has found its rhythm and the outside world is all black hiss, your father kneels. Again he tucks the coals together like he's packing a wound, tight protected, fed with 2 chips and a twist of grass. Then ash goes over the top, not to smother but to smolder, a powder blanket that slows the burn to the pace of a heartbeat. In the morning, he'll lift a corner of that blanket and coax the red back to language. Fail, and you're a stranger to your own house, building from nothing while the cold drinks your fingers. Stoves earn their keep out here. An open fireplace is romance and waste a parade of sparks and stories for a place with timber to burn. A Castian stove is a conservative banker. It radiates, hoards, negotiates every BTU like it's gold. You learn its moods as if it were an uncle who can help or harm depending on how you speak. Feed it small, it sulks and eats your kindling. Feed it thick too soon, it chokes and coughs smoke into your quilts. Cleaned its pipe and it breathes. Let creosote grow like a black candle. And one night you wake to a roaring inside your walls you can't smother with reason. Chimney fires announce themselves with a hungry sound, the opposite of the winter winds. Complaint, it's joy, and that's how you know it's wrong. The pipe skin goes from warm to hot, to move your hand now in seconds. The old men taught you the counterspell, a tin of damp sand by the stove, and a rag to slap over the draft. Starve. It don't feed the beast with panic and air. After, you scrape the pipe clean and stare at the black scrapings that almost ended names in your house. You promise to check weekly and mean it. There's another danger, quieter and crueler. Smoke is honest, you can see it, smell it, choke on it, and fix it. Carbon monoxide is a traitor you can't detect with the senses you were born with. Out here, folks borrow the senses of small things. A canary in a cage near the stove, a mouse in a little crate, if you have to. If the bird sags or the mouse sleeps too deeply when the flue should be drawing, you don't debate. You crack a vent, even if it means a colder night. Better shiver than never wake. Asterisk on good days, fire becomes a multi-shift worker. While the stove cooks mush, flat stones warm along its skirt dents. Dark ones you've learned won't explode when heated. River stones are suspect. Trapped water becomes artillery. Those stones go into beds before dusk, wrapped in rags, little suns for feet and ribs. A pair slips into a wooden foot warmer under the table during chores, or into a sleigh box for the trip to town you shouldn't make but must. Later, when you tuck a stone into the dog's nest and he thumps his gratitude, you feel like a minor god with pockets of dawn to hand out. Sometimes you get lucky and live near a cut bank where the earth shows. It's brown coalagnite that crumbles in the hand but burns longer than a chip. It's not the anthracite the papers brag about back east, no blue flames. No bragging rights, but in a place where heat is measured in survival minutes, brown coal earns a seat at the table. You pick through the seam in full, stack the chunks. Away from the house, sparks are egalitarian. Cover them against blowing powder. When you burn it, you accept the extra soot and the need for more frequent cleaning. Compromise is a Prairie word. Asterisk. When luck is stingier, you make your own wood. The Germans in the next valley showed you a method that sounds like a joke until it saves your hands. Mix straw with manure, let horses trample the blend to a pressed mat, then cut it into bricks and dry them like bread with no water. They burn slow, they burn long. They smell like humility and warmth. You don't announce it to visitors. You had visitors in January. But you do write a little thank you in your ledger to people you used to call odd and now call teachers. Heat isn't only about fuel. It's about paths, schedules, and what you refuse to waste. The house runs on a rhythm. Chores that demand still fingers happen closest to the stove after the morning burn. Chores that can be done in mittens move outward when the fire falls to coals. Tea kettles aren't luxuries there. Boilers for the next thaw, steam to nudge humidity back into air that snaps skin and splits lips. Every pot on the stove earns its place twice. Cook, now humidify later. Warm now, wash later. You're done with single purpose in December. You plan warmth like a campaign. If someone must go outside after dark, you stack advantages, layers ready. On pegs wool inside, leather outside, mittens thawed and dry as law. Scarf folded in the pattern that lets breath out without icing your own face mask. You pre-open the passage door and hang the rope from its hook so you don't fumble. You set a heated stone by the threshold so blood in fingers doesn't go on strike the moment it meets the night. And you time it, 10 minutes out, 5 more. Then you think in to check your own thoughts for the lies cold tells it. Just a second, you deserve it then back. Rope in hand, door shut, vent cracked. Cheeks stinging with a pain that means you're not dead. Fuel scarcity rearranges your ethics. What had a story becomes a flame. The cradle that held 3 babies but sits empty now, the wood is seasoned, forgiving. You cry, then you burn it. The chair with the carved back where your grandfather told you about rain in places that have trees you pry off to rungs in February and promise to carve new ones in June. Books last. They're dry. They burn eager. You don't burn them until you have to. Some winters you have to. You whisper a sentence to the author as the page curls and say, "Sorry," out loud. Survival is a liturgy filled with apologies and gratitude. On the coldest nights, the whole town becomes one big stove. The church or the schoolhouse, the building with the best pipe and the least leak stays lit. Families drift there in the morning like planets finding a sun. Boys haul in fuel from the common pile. Men mind the draft. Women run a democracy of kettles and one-pot meals. Old folks nap in chairs closest to the heat. Babies sleep inside coats that once were pride and now are blankets. No one is comfortable. Everyone is alive. When you go back to your house at dusk, the fire you banked at noon is still there, a low red you can coax into evening. There's a moment each day, usually late chores done, kettle humming, dog pretending not to beg when the stove's door is open and you can see the orange glowing metal inside. It looks like a planet core, like something that belongs under mountains. It's in your house because you dragged it here on a wagon that broke an axle and you mended it with wire and swearing and the neighbor's last good nail. You look at that heat and know how close you live to its edge. You don't romanticize it. Fire is not a friend. Friends forgive. Fire keeps score. Still, you learn to build a life around its clock. Stories happen in the radius where it reaches. Sewing, card games, lessons whispered to a child, tracing letters in a slate propped on their knees. Arguments cool faster than rooms do. There isn't the fuel for grudges in January. Laughter, the laughter spends no heat and buys some back. It turns a house from a box that keeps you not dead into a place where people do more than endure. Tomorrow, we step out of the heat's circle and into the air that wants your fingers. Fire buys you minutes. Clothing buys you the rest. Out there, fashion is a hazard and pride is a draft. Out there, a mitten is worth 2 fingers and wool is a word for mercy. Asterisk, your clothes are a house you wear step. 1 foot beyond the stove's circle and you learn the harshest physics lesson on the prairie. Heat leaves fast. Cold arrives faster. Walls and fire buy you hours. Clothing buys you minutes again and again, all day, every time you open a door. Out here, what you wear isn't decoration. It's architecture you strap to your body. Get the design wrong, and the wind will audit your mistakes in full. Start with a simple rule, the old-timers say like a prayer. Cotton is a summer lie. In January, cotton holds water like a grudge. Sweat in it, and it drinks your warmth as it dries. The prairie doesn't negotiate. It simply takes. So your first layer is wool not because it's fashionable, but because the sheep's gift keeps insulating even when damp. A thin wool shirt next to the skin, then another if the air is the kind that bites through promises. Over that, something. With Loftmore wool if you have it. Sometimes a quilted vest that looks like it was made from leftover blankets because it was. Finally, an outer shell that tells the wind to go bother the horizon. Leather is good if you keep it fed, waxed. Canvas if you can make it. Either way, seams tight, cuffs that cinch, a collar that stands like a small wall around your neck. Your father tests your layers with a glance and a palm at your chest, between your shoulder blades, inside your elbow. He's not being affectionate. He's checking the physics. Warm, not wet, he says. Warm and wet turns to cold and sorry. You learn to pace the day to your clothes and your clothes to the day. Before heavy work hauling hay, chopping drifts you loosen a button, crack the scarf, let the steam escape so you don't soak your own survival. When work stops, you seal up instantly. If you're comfortable while standing still outside, you're overdressed for labor. If you're comfortable while working, you're about to be in trouble when you stop. Hands decide how many jobs you can finish before frostbite does its arithmetic. Gloves separate, mittens unite. 5 fingers in 5 tubes look civilized. 5 fingers together behind one wall stay alive. The trick the elders teach is a system. A thin wool liner mitten you can dry fast, inside a fur or heavy wool shell, inside a leather overmitt that blocks wind and wet. A string through your sleeves keeps a mitten from disappearing into white. The moment you pull it off to tie a knot, by the stove, a simple miracle, a drying rack your father whittled to fit over the top plate. Branches like antlers where mittens hang open-mouthed, breathing steam into the room while they remember how to be warm. He keeps a spare pair near the flue knot, because he's cautious, but because he's seen what one soaked mitten costs. Feet are where stoicism goes to die. Freeze a fingertip and you swear. Freeze a toe and you limp for life. You learn a 2-sock. Truth, a thin wool sock to move moisture, a thicker wool sock to hold heat. Tight boots strangle blood. Loose boots breed blisters. Both are invitations to February's favorite game. Some settlers swear by high leather boots worked nightly with tallow until they drink no more. Others borrow from their indigenous neighbors, and wear moccasins lined with rabbit fur, footgear that flexes with your step and lets blood do its heat work. On killing cold days, you slip a handful of dry grass between socks and shell for extra loft. You carry a spare dry pair in your inner pocket, warmed by your own chest. Insurance against the moment adrift steals your balance and snow finds the top of your boot like it's been waiting. Head and face are where the wind tries to bargain for your core. A bare head leaks heat you can't spare. A wool cap under a fur hood is best. One traps warmth, the other breaks the gale. Scarves are not just for throats, they're movable walls. Wrap in a pattern the elders show you, across the cheeks, under the chin, around the neck, leaving a small gap at the mouth so your breath can escape without turning your own protection into ice armor. A smear of tallow across cheekbones and nose buys you 5 more minutes before skin goes from red to white to numb. The first time you feel your eyelashes freeze and clink when you blink, you won't forget it. The second time, you'll close your eyes half a second longer near the stove and thaw them deliberately. Patient as a locksmith, asterisk. Clothes aren't garments out here, they're systems. Every piece overlaps the next with purpose. Sleeves tuck inside MIT cuffs. Waistbands overlap the layer beneath. Coats cover the seat so, when you kneel to fix a trace or cut a knot, snow doesn't steal into your spine. Metal lives outside fabric. Cold iron against skin is a thief. Knives ride in leather that hangs where your hand can find it blind. Buttons beat laces when your fingers are clumsy. Toggles beat both. You wax every seam you can reach with rendered fat. You patch before holes become stories. You keep a sewing kit in a tin in your coat. Needles, waxed thread, scraps of wool, a sliver of leather, a handful of bone buttons. You fix small failures before they invite large ones. There's a ritual to going out that becomes second nature because the alternative is frostbite. Mitt liners first, thumbs tested. Outer mitts waiting on the peg. Hat on, then hood up, then scarf wound. Check the rope clipped at the door. Boots already stomped warm by the stove. Laces loosened so you don't fight them while the door is open and the house is bleeding heat. Someone holds the inner door while someone else closes the outer your vestibule, doing its quiet. brilliant job of keeping your home from inhaling the storm. Ready? Someone asks. It's not a question, it's an agreement. Moisture is the enemy you can't see until it wins. You learn to read the shine on your underlayers the way you read the sky for weather. The second your back dampens, you cool your effort or crack your layers. While chopping, you set a metronome in your head. 10 steady strokes. Stop, breathe, jacket open a hand's width. Keep your hat but loosen your scarf, then seal up as soon as the pile is done. Coming back in, you change what's wet, immediately socks first. Then mitt liners, because a damp garment is a promise the night intends to keep. Your indigenous neighbors teach lessons as old as the wind. Don't fight the gale with corners. Turn it with curves. That means round hoods that leave no edges for the wind to catch, leggings that tie smooth, moccasins that bend. They show you how to cut a mitten so the fur lies backward toward the fingertips, trapping air in the direction heat wants to travel. They teach you to wear wool under leather so the leather blocks the wind and the wool keeps your skins small. Climate stable. One woman laughs kindly at your Boston coat with its fine lapels and shows you a brain-penned buckskin that sheds wet and swallows wind like it's not there. You stop calling her garments primitive the first time you come home. With warm fingers, frostbite announces itself with a small betrayal. Feeling goes missing before pain arrives. Numb isn't brave. Numb is your nerves clocking out. You learn to check each other nose, ears, cheeks, fingertips, like a pre-flight ritual. Pale patches mean frost snip if you catch it, frostbite if you pretend. The cure isn't a bucket of heat. It's steady warmth. Hands go into armpits, cheeks under warm palms. No rubbing ice crystals grind flesh. No snow old myths die hard. And no thawing unless you can keep them warm. Refreezing is ruin. The rewarming hurts like it's supposed to. Pain means blood. Remembers the map. You swear, someone squeezes your shoulder, and the fire keeps talking its steady language. Children learn the system as a game because games stick. Thumbs together. You sing when mittens go on, and small hands answer with a chorus and a wiggle. Boots line the vestibule in a neat platoon. The first pair back from the stove moves to the front so no one slides a warm foot into a cold. Trap. A child cries the first time her scarf freezes solid at the mouth. You show her how to push the cloth out with a breath before it sets. A small trick that saves her a dozen tears in February. At night, she lays out her layers in the order they'll go on in the morning. Flat person on the floor, so she can dress in the 5 seconds the inner door is open. Even chores, bow to clothing. Work that needs bare fingers, tying knots. Clearing ice from a latch gets scheduled for the first 5 minutes after a read. Work that accepts mittens tossing hay, hauling water, shoveling a path fills the rest. You set time limits on exposure, not to be dramatic, but to be honest. 12 minutes to the barn and back in this wind, 8 if it rises, 5 minutes. To smash ice on the trough. 60 seconds to clear the sledge runner before the cold convinces you to take a seat you can't afford. Someone keeps the door watch like a lifeguard, counting under their breath and ready to tug the rope if numbers become names. Leather is a living contract. Treat it and it keeps yours. Every night, boots get worked with tallow until the seams gleam and the tongue drinks its share. The coat gets a smear where the wind chews. Mitt shells get their turn, so tomorrow's snow falls off like bad news. You don't accept stiff leather cracks. Cracked leather leaks. Leaking leather kills. It's not vanity, it's maintenance, the way you oil a gun or sharpen a blade. Some days demand everything the system can give. A calf is due in a squall that makes the horizon disappear, and the barn door a rumor. You dress like you might sleep in a snowbank, because you might. Inner wool, mid-wool, outer leather, double socks, moccasins with overboots, mitt liner, mitt, shell, leather, over, hat, hood, scarf, vent warmed by your own breath, rope at your waist. You test each tie, each button, each buckle. You tuck a dry mitten pair into your coat like a secret, and a hot stone wrapped in rags into the sledge box. Out you go, a portable house with a stove for a heart, into air that wants to turn you into a cautionary tale. You return with fingers that hurt in the good way, with cheeks that glow, with a calf that will live to chew June, with the barn steamed to a miracle by animal breath, and a loose patch you'll nail down come noon. You hang the overmitts on the rack, swap liners, set boots near but not on the stove. Burned leather is a lesson you learn once, and watch the ice melt from your scarf in a puddle. The floor drinks without complaint. Someone passes you a cup. Heat travels from tin to palm to bone. You look like a snow creature in the doorway, and then like yourself again by late winter. The clothing system feels less like gear and more like discipline, a choreography you perform without speech. It's the difference between heroics and habit. Heroics run out. Habit sees spring, tomorrow. We go where clothing can't help you much, into the cellar and the jars, into the strange math of calories versus cold. Fire and fabric keep a body. Warm food keeps a body possible. Asterisk food is heat you can eat. Fire and fabric keep a body warm. Food keeps a body possible. Out here, calories aren't numbers on a package. They are minutes of life you can buy back from the cold. Every jar, every sack, every strip of dried meat is a stored sunrise. You don't have food, you have time, measured in potatoes, in pints, in pounds. Open the cellar door. Air that remembers autumn spills up the steps, cool, damp, a little earthy. You lower a lantern, and the light catches the quiet architecture of survival. Barrels set in sand, shelves hoarding darkness, cabbages hanging by their roots from a ceiling beam like green moons in eclipse, onions braided and swaying slightly in the draft you just made, apples quarantined on their own shelf because their breath rushes other food toward ruin. You didn't know that when you came west. You know it now, like you know the sound of a chimney learning to pull. The cellar is your first line of defense, because Earth doesn't panic. 6, 7 feet down, the ground is stubbornly itself cold, but not killing, humid but not rotting. Your father cut vents high and low and built little sliders over them, so the cellar can breathe when it needs to, and hold its breath when a cold snap tries to turn your dinner to stone. This room is a machine without gears, powered by common sense and 1,000 lost experiments someone else made before you were born. Potatoes live in sand the way gold might live in a bank. Carrots and beets too, nested so tight the winter can't find them. The barrel looks like a drum of dirt until your mother plunges her hand into it and comes up with an orange wand, still snapping fresh in January. Brush, don't wash. She says for the 100th time. Water in the cellar writes trouble. She says it like a charm. It is 1 asterisk. Your ledger lies on a shelf by the steps. Once a week, by lantern, your father counts. Not roughly, precisely. Pints of kraut, jars of beans, sacks of flour, marked by weight in chalk that he rewrites as the weeks erode them. Strips of jerky, braided like belts on a peg. A crock of lard under a cheesecloth veil. Fat that will fry, save, mend, and if it must burn. He does the math, without sentiment. How many mouths? How many weeks to April if April behaves? How many meals can shrink before people do? The figures aren't cruel, they are honest. Out here, honesty is gentle compared with what weather does when you lie to yourself. Asterisk. You can taste summer in the cellar if you know where to look. Fermenting crock stoneware with wooden lids and waitside small suns. Cabbage turned into sauerkraut that bites your tongue and keeps your gums from bleeding when February does its work on bodies stuck inside. Pickles that remember gardens. Beets that sing faintly of sugar. You didn't come west knowing microbes were your allies. You learned because your neighbor's children lost teeth one winter, and the old German woman down the road shook her head and said, "Barrels, not bravado." Now you shred cabbage until your shoulders ache in October and pack it in with salt and a pounding stick as if you're preserving days themselves. You are. Meat is a season unless you're clever. A hog butchered becomes a feast for the day and a plan for the months. Hams salted in a barrel where crystals shine like frost. Bacon cured and later smoked in a lean-to that stinks in a way you'll call holy by January. Beef becomes jerky strips, cut neat, salted, and hung where air can do what fire can't. Venison dries over strings you strung across the kitchen for 2 weeks last fall. The house smelled like iron and victory. In a crock, submerged in fat, floats the frontier's paradox, potted. Meat that will wait all winter if you keep the seal clean and your spoon honest. Someone in the settlement, maybe you knows, the recipe that doesn't have a writer's name because it belongs to the land. Dried meat pounded to powder, rendered tallow warmed until it turns the texture of mercy. Dried berries for tartness and vitamins. Your mouth can't spell, but your blood knows. You mix them, pack the result in rawhide or crocks, and set aside. The temptation to eat it on days that don't deserve it. Pemmican is for blizzard days, rope days. We might sleep in the barn days. 1 pound is a lifeline. It tastes like necessity and thrift and, somehow, a promise. Flour looks like abundance until February counts your scoops. You keep it dry, high, and closed, the lid tied tight against mice that will write their own ration plan if you let them. Cornmeal behaves better in deep winterless fussy, more forgiving. Out of these 2 powders you churn 100 variations. Johnny cake, ash cakes near the stove edge, thick noodles rolled on the table and cut with a knife that knows both wood and dough. On good weeks there's a handful of dried apples to soften, in water and fold into batter. On lean ones, there's sweetness in the sound. A knife makes sliding through a loaf that's going to get you through 2 days. Then there is fat, the unsung heat you eat. You learn to love it the way you learned to respect a rope in a whiteout. Fat in a stew so it coats your ribs before you step out. Fat in a pan so a thin slice of meat becomes more than an idea. The cold treats thin people like kindling. Winter is cruel to vanity. The mirror can have you back in June. The kitchen upstairs becomes a factory the cellar feeds. You brown onions until the smell tells everyone to sit. Then float them with beans, with barley, with a fist of kraut because the old country ladies say so, and the old country ladies have outlived 3 blizzards each. You keep a sourdough starter in a jar that travels between laps and stove edge. Alive, bubbling, a pet you feed flour and water and patience. On Sunday, you add a spoonful of molasses to the bread so the children remember what sweetness is for. On Tuesday, you slice it thin and fry it in drippings so no one calls it stale. Rationing is a choreography. Morning means hot and plain mush. Coffee if it's Sunday or someone had a good hunt. Noon is fuel-thick slices, jerky softened in water and cooked with potatoes, cabbage. Evening is replenish more fat, more warm, more talk, so your body remembers it's part of a group, and groups survive what individuals don't. On the worst weeks, soup stretches. A bone becomes a stock that sees 5 days through. A handful of barley becomes a stew if you wait long enough and believe just a little. You fight not just hunger, but loss. A sack wet by a leak becomes a story that ends badly. The day you find mouse droppings in a barrel you thought safe, you don't curse. You clean, cry if you must, rework the seals, move the barrel, and add 2 traps to the night's ritual. You fail publicly and fix publicly so the neighbor with less pride and fewer sacks learns on your losses instead of his own. The prairie will punish your secrecy. Then there's luck, which you caught by being ready. A river 2 miles north freezes hard enough to carry a man. Your father builds a sled from scrap, laces a chisel to a long stick, pockets a line, takes a bucket with a lid because even water turns traitor in wind. He chops a neat square through ice, so thick it looks like glass stolen from a giant's window. The first hour, nothing. The second, nothing. The third, everything, if you're patient. And your hook is honest. He drags home fish rigid and shining. On nights like that, you eat fresh, cheeks burning from stove and gratitude. The town's survival starts resembling a recipe too. After the hard winter no one likes to name first, you all built the common pantry in the church cellar. Each family contributes what they can bear when the wagons can still roll. Jars, cobs, chips, a small sack of flour, a promise written in the notebook by the door. No one touches it until a week like the one hitting now, when 3 families have blisters where their hope used to be, and babies look at spoons like they used to look at stars. A woman with flour but no meat swaps for a jar of beans. A man with a glut of pickles trades dignity free for a crock of lard. You sign your name and the date and promise repayment in spring. Some debts are measured in help rather than jars, and the book accepts that currency to dot food is physics disguised as kindness. Cold makes bodies burn hotter. A man hauling snow through a headwind writes his hunger with a shovel. A child in a loft where warmth pools needs more than her height suggests. An old woman near the stove needs less than she insists, but more than you were going to serve. Because she gave your mother the kraut recipe that kept your gums in your mouth. You were portioned by need, not noise. People remember that the mind eats, too. In February, the cellar feels smaller and the shelves look accusatory. That's the hour you light to extra candles you can't spare and make supper a gathering. Every Sunday, everyone crams into the meeting house and the tables fill with what the week allows. Sometimes it's almost a feast-roasted squash that somehow kept sweet, a ham everyone stares at like a church window. Sometimes it's 2 big kettles of potato soup and bread sweating butter. The children laugh anyway. The laughing does as much work as the fat. Mistakes teach quickly. The family that arrived with sacks on the floor learned about moisture wicking the way the wind teaches loose shingles. The young couple that stored apples beside potatoes learned the chemistry lesson that didn't wear lab coats. You watched them carry a spoiled barrel to the edge of town looking like pallbearers. After, you saw them build shelves with air gaps, hang their cabbage by the stalk, mark each jar with date and contents in a hand that got neater as the pantry did. Survival turns beginners into engineers. There is a wrong lesson out here that the winter tries to sell, that hunger is nobility. It isn't. It's danger. You eat when it's time, not when you feel like it, because feel like it goes mute when frost is in your blood. You drink hot water like it's tea, if you've got no tea, because your body is a steam engine, and steam engines that run dry seas. You carry a pocket ration too, fingers of jerky, a hard biscuit, a bit of sugar wrapped in cloth, every time. You cross the threshold in a month with an R. Pride doesn't thaw fingers. At day's end, someone always checks the cellar one more time. A habit, a superstition, insurance. The lantern finds the same barrels, the same crocks, the same onions that will outlive any story you tell them. You listen the way you listen to a sleeping child, any hitch in breath, any new drip, any mouse bold enough to announce itself. Quiet is good. Quiet means another 24 hours bought and paid for with summer's debt and autumn's labor. Back up the stairs. The stove answers with its steady tick. You stretch a strip of jerky until it turns from board to meat and drop it in the pot. A curl of kraut. A potato cut into cubes that steam like a promise. A smear of lard that will set everyone's eyes closing halfway through the first spoon. You tear bread with your hands because knives are for the daylight, and the table becomes a map of gratitude grease, prints, crumbs. A smear of beet on a child's lip that looks like lipstick in a warmer world. You make a small rule that is really a big one. No one goes to bed hungry. Even if not hungry tonight is a spoon of stew and half a slice. Tomorrow, cold will ask a fresh series of questions. Tonight, you answer with heat you can swallow, and still the ledger whispers. Weeks to go, the horizon answers, storms to come. The rope by the door waits like a line in a hymn. Next, we step into the weather that doesn't care how clever your shelves are. The whiteout that turns miles into inches and footsteps into riddles. What you eat buys the time to survive it. What you know buys the path through it. Asterisk. Whiteout. When the world erases itself, clear morning on the prairie is a liar. Blue dome, a hush over the snow like a held breath, sun throwing glitter from every drift then. Sometime afternoon, the wind remembers its old grudge. A faint tremor runs through the air. Chickens go quiet. Horses turn their rumps to the northwest. If you're smart, you take the hint. If you're stubborn, you get a lesson. You've felt storms before curtains of snow, honest blizzards that let you see 20, 30 feet. A whiteout is different. It doesn't arrive like weather. It arrives like a decision. The horizon folds toward you. The sky steps off its pedestal, and in one long exhale, the world goes from infinite to one arm's length. The air fills with dry crystals that don't fall so much as hover and scream. Sound goes sideways. Touch becomes the only honest sense left. Rope, your father says, already looping a coil through the barn jack. He ties it off to the inner doorpost, tugs twice, then knots it around his waist. You take your spot behind him, the next loop around you, a living chain. The vestibule drops the first shock of cold. The outer door throws the second Dan open-handed slap that steals half. Your breath, you step into a white that isn't color, it's refusal. Left hand on the rope, right hand on the wall, you move. The house becomes texture instead of shape. The shallow gouge where the hinge shadow usually falls. A nail head that always snags a mitten thread. The rough seam where you added a second plank last summer. In fair weather, they're quirks. In this, they're breadcrumbs that don't blow away. The physics of a whiteout are cruelly simple. You can't see, you can't hear in any meaningful way. The wind carries your own breath back to you, so loud it's like a stranger speaking in your ear. You can't smell much past wool and your own fear. You can only feel. The rope is truth. You hold it in a grip that isn't frantic, because frantic knots your forearm and steals blood from fingers you'll need in 3 minutes when a latch freezes. Your father moves like a metronome. Step, pause, test the line. Your job is to be the echo, his timing, your timing, then the next body behind you keeping the same beat. A chain, not a crowd. Halfway, the wind climbs an octave. Snow needles find the one gap you left between scarf and cheek and sting like bees. Your eyelashes shellac together. You blink slow to thaw them. Your own body heat turning frost back into water and back into frost again. You recite the numbers. You know by heart. 52 steps to the barn in clear weather. In this 70, the drifts have rewritten your map. Your father doesn't count steps, he counts touches. The rope's first knot, then the second, then the carved groove in the post where the line jumps from house wall to passage frame. He found those in fair weather on purpose. He taught you to find them in foul. You smack into the passage door with more force than you meant. Depth perception is something the white stole and hasn't returned. The latch is a small sculpture of ice. Your father doesn't yank it blindly. He sets his mittened palm on the handle and holds 20 seconds of skin heat through 2 layers and leather. A transfer of degrees that buys you progress. Then he rocks the handle, gentle, patient, as if he's easing a baby back to sleep. It gives. The door opens onto a corridor you built last spring out of scrap and stubbornness. You step into a wind that's still mean but no longer unhinged, and the world grows a shape again. The cow's low blunt sounds like bumpers in fog. You're in dot inside the barn. The air is 10 degrees kinder and 100 decibels quieter. The horses stand with gathered muscles, eyes rimmed with frost. Their breath makes ghosts. The cows have iced beards where water met chin. The chickens mutter under the buggy in a feathered drift of their own. You work fast without hurrying. That's the whiteout rule. Panic costs fingers. The trough is a single sheet. You break it by hammering the edge. Not the middler trick the old man taught you, so the big sheet flips and you don't spend 5 extra minutes fighting shards. You toss the slab aside where the horse won't cut a pastern on it. You pour out grain like a priest, measured even, the exact ration your father wrote in the ledger. The cows' mouths steam the room into a sauna of relief and smell. A whiteout is not the time to invent chores, but it is the time to avoid future emergencies. You toss a flake of hay into the barn's far corner. The horses shift, their bodies moving heat from air into muscle. You lay a heated stone, wrapped and carried under your coat, next to the bucket, so the next trip buys you an extra minute before the rim catches glass again. Your father checks the vent holes you drilled high in the walls last summer. Snow caps them from the outside like frosting. He pokes a dowel through, and a thin ribbon of safety returns to a room that might be sealed by morning. Coming back is the same operation in reverse, and also a different one. The rope feels like salvation on the way out. It feels like a temptation. On the way back, you want to grip and run. You don't. You stop with your father when he stops. You lean into the gale when he leans. And you resist the insane itch in your legs that says, hurry. Hurry is how you sweat inside your own shelter system and build yourself a body-sized icebox. Hurry is how people sit down for a breath and don't get up. Halfway to the door, the line jerks. For one heartbeat, you think it's the wind. It's not. The knot at your waist just tightened. Someone behind you has stumbled. You plant knees bent, boots turned a little sideways to make a wedge of your own body, and you become an anchor. You don't turn because turning costs orientation. You don't shout because shouting is for distance and the rope is near. You wait until the line slackens, feel the apology tug, then resume the beat. The chain is only as strong as the quietest person in it, inside the vestibule. The air feels tropical in the worst possible way. Humid breath, trapped by weather that doesn't care. You close the outer door and open the inner, and the house exhales. Scarves come loose, hats peel, mitts hang open on their rack like little tents. No one heads straight for the stove. You've learned that lesson. You stand in the middle distance and let your skin catch up. The urge to jam hands onto hot iron is powerful and wrong. Your mother holds out the old advice in a tidy packet: armpits first, tea next, stove later, and you obey because none of this is symbolic. You think of the teacher whose name still circles the settlements. The one who tied rope around 17 children and brought back 16. A ratio the newspapers called heroic and the adults called mercy with a margin. You think of the neighbor who kept fencing pliers by the door and made a habit of clipping his rope to the wire fence line that led past his house, past his well, to the barn and back. He said he never trusted a rope straight to the barn because lines go slack and people wander with them. A fence pulls in a direction. Out here, you learn to prefer bosses to suggestions. There are whiteout rules that get carved into memory because they were carved into stones first. Never start a trip you can't finish. The wind will change mid-task and make the second half twice as long. Never untie to save time. Knots buy you life. Speed sells it. Never trust your eyes. The drift you thought was a door is a drift. If you're lost, make shelter smaller than a grave. A scooped out drift, a bank on the lee side of a shed, a blanket pinned with your own body heat beats miles. If your brain starts offering naps, insult it. Move, count, sing, do math out loud. The mind lies nicely when it's dying. In town, they formalized whiteouts into work. After the hard winter, the men put up snow fences in full ragged lines of boards that convinced the drifts to lay their bones 10 yards away from doors instead of on them. They strung guide ropes at chest height along the main paths and replaced them whenever they chafed themselves to fuzz. They set lantern posts with screened chimneys so they wouldn't blow out insane wind and would glow like a constellation in mad wind. In January, women filled storm boxes by each door, extra mitt, liners in oiled cloth, a tin of matches and wax, a bit of pemmican, a strip of canvas to wrap around a face if a scarf iced hard. You don't improvise in white. You execute. The schoolhouse taught the children a poem for it. Something with a rhythm that marched as you marched. Hand to the line, nose to the wool, steps like a clock, keep your head full. Silly until it isn't. A girl sings it years later. To her own boy, cupping his face after a drift slapped him for underestimating it. He rolls his eyes. The next week, he sings it under his breath when the sky goes sideways between the house and the woodpile, and he arrives back at the door with a face streaked in thaw and surprise. The poem earned its place on the wall. It isn't all crisis. Whiteouts teach gratitude in odd measures, too. The sound of water cracking into liquid in a trough you were sure would stay glass. The feel of a rope carrying the story of a dozen hands. The way a house's doorframe becomes a frame again, the world returning to photograph after hours of smear. The way breath tastes inside a scarf when you know for absolute certain the scarf saved your skin. They teach architecture. After one night where smoke curled down because snow capped the chimney, you cut a second vent hole and built a hood of wire and tin that laughs at drifts. After a noon, when the rope froze into a bar, you waxed it with tallow in fall and added glove-sized knots at 2-pace intervals so a blind hand could count progress in a new language. After a morning you misjudged by 2 minutes and watched frost slide from white to waxy on your son's ear. You cut the hood deeper and your pride shorter and asked the Lakota neighbor to show you face wrap patterns again. He did and didn't. Say I told you so. Whiteouts polish humility like ice polishes everything else. Once, in a storm that lasted 3 days, the settlement made a second town inside the first. 7 houses stayed lit as hearth hubs. Everyone else moved by rope between them in assigned hours. Cook here, warm there, sleep back in your own quilts for 2, then wake for your slot at the barn sled. Work flowed in a loop through white. A fiddler played at the center of one kitchen, and the music turned dread into a task you could outlast. People didn't die those 3 days, though they could have. Systems, not heroics. When the sky finally decides it's finished, it doesn't apologize. The wind lays down like a tired dog, the white thins to a moving gauze, and then to something like snow again. The world comes back in pieces. The edge of the sled, the curve of the trough, the lean of the fence line. The sun, low and smug, throws knives of light at every surface. It's quiet. Everyone looks taller because they've been measured and are still here. You go outside then, not because you must, but because you want to see what's left of the map. Drifts pretending to be hills. The roof wearing a white hat. The path you carved a clean canyon through the yard. You tug the rope and coil it onto a peg, not because you won't need it again, but because coiled things are ready things. You knock the ice out of the passage door's jam so it won't seize at dusk. You run a mitt along the fence wire and feel it hum faintly where the wind has been plucking it for hours. You think about how thin your equipment is: rope, mitt, scarf, a brain that has learned its limits, and how much it still bought. That night, because humans are perverse and wise, the town packs the meeting house. Someone passes coffee thin. As tea, someone else plays that fiddle again. People retell the same storm they just lived as if it happened to other, more foolish people. They point at the children and make them roll their eyes. Everybody laughs too loudly at jokes that wouldn't survive June. It's medicine. The white took a swing at the map and you drew it back in, one line at a time. Laughter fills the empty spaces the wind left behind. Tomorrow, the old cold returns honest blue, honest bite. You'll fix what the white broke, shovel what it dropped. Count what it cost. You'll string a fresh length of rope because the one you use today has a memory you don't want to test tomorrow. You'll hang mitts by the stove and swap liners and rub tallow into leather. You'll set a kettle on just for steam. Your house will tick as it warms and you'll think, that was close, and that was planned. Next, we move from storms to the thing no storm can fix for you, other people. Because all of this, the ropes, the fires, the cellars, the clothing systems works twice as well when the load is shared, and half as well when you hoard it. Out here, a lone settler is a myth the wind loves to tell. A community is a fact that spring keeps proving. Asterisk, lost and found, when the trail walks away there. Comes a day each winter when the world asks you a question with teeth. Stay or go. The sky is that washed pewter that can't decide between mercy and meanness. You're 10 miles from town with a wagon that suddenly weighs like regret, a horse blowing steam, and a wind that's begun to scrape its chair closer. Your load matters. Medicine for the baby's cough, a spool of wire you promised to a neighbor whose fence keeps his milk on his side of the world. 10 miles is nothing in June. In January, 10 miles can be a novel with a bad ending. You've planned as if the plan will have to save you without witnesses. That's the first rule of winter travel. Assume you'll be your own rescue. You left at grey light, because dawn to noon is the window the Prairie offers decent people. You stacked advantages like kindling layers that breathe, mitts ready to rotate, to dry socks against your chest, scarf wrapped so breath can escape, hat under hood, wool under leather, pocket ration in a tin jerky, hard biscuit, a candy for the mind, matches dipped in wax so they behave, a stub of candle, a needle and thread, a square of oiled cloth, a length of line. On the wagon, blankets in a tight roll, a small shovel, an axe, the hooked walking stick you carved last fall for probing drifts and fishing for buried rope. You walked the horse the first mile so it started warm and steady, not hot and sweating. You counted landmarks with a quiet greed-loan cottonwood stump like a broken tooth, frozen creek with the dogleg bend, fence line that runs east-west then loses nerve. You were doing it right, then winter did what it does. It made a new map. Snow starts honest. Then the wind signs its name across it and turns the road into sastruge hard and hollow, ridges and troughs like a frozen ocean. The wagon runners complain. The horse staggers on a polished patch and throws you a look that says, "Are you sure?" A gust lifts a veil of powder and sets it down somewhere unhelpful. The horizon blurs at the edges. You feel the first tug of the question, turn back or push on. The prairie has its own calculus. Out here you carry rules the way a sailor carries knots. One is called the rule of halves. If you've spent half your daylight, or half your horse, or half your fuel turnaround, pride is a bad accountant. Another is the one for every push forward, you owe yourself 3 checks, sky, wind, beast, then one plan to retreat that you can execute with numb fingers. If your retreat plan involves luck, you've written a wish, not a plan. You push another mile because the sky holds and the horse's ears are still pricked, not pinned. Then the wind shifts hard, suddenly from the west instead of the north, and something inside you notices before your head does. You smell snow clean, metallic, like a knife rinsed in cold water. You do the math without numbers. The town is nearer than home if the road stays a road. The town is farther than home if the road turns into a rumor. You lay a palm on the horse's neck, feel the damp under its mane, and decide, we go forward. With an anchor, you take your line 50 feet, knots every 2 and cinch it to the wagon. Tie the other end around your waist. If the wagon sticks, you'll feel it in your bones. If the horse bolts, it will not bolt far. You hook your stick and walk, probing every other step because what looks flat can be a cornice with a hollow beneath it. And breaking through wins you a lesson in ice fishing you didn't want. You talk to keep your breath honest and your mind out of the warm ditch it loves. Fence by noon, creek by 1, stove by dusk. You talk to the horse, too, not because it understands words, but because it understands rhythm. The voice says, we are a herd. We are a plan. Then it happens, the road walks away. The wind brings a white that isn't snow so much as refusal. Your world shrinks to a circle of air you could hold in 2 arms. Sound goes woolly. Up and down feel like opinions. Sight is a liar, touch is king. You stop, because stopping is a decision. You wedge the wagon's runner with the shovel so it can't wander. You get the horse's head into the lee of the wagon and throw the blanket roll over both necks. One blanket for animal heat, one for human heat. No pretty distinctions today. The wind claws at your hood and begs you to untie something foolish. You don't. Asterisk. Most first-timers panic here and do the thing the prairie loves. Walk for it. They choose a direction that feels like town because their toes remember it. The wind disagrees. The body lies when it's loosing. Just a short rest. Just a little run to be warm. You make your world smaller instead of bigger. That's how people who want to live think. Shelter is a verb. On the open, treeless prairie, that verb starts with snow. You read the wind with your face and pick the lee side. Of the wagon, you dig low and round, not tall and square round, holds itself up, square collapses. You make a roof that curves, not because you care about pretty, but because drips need a plan, and a dome sheds melt where you put it. You vent one thumb-thick hole with the walking stick through the roof, because air is a quiet killer and you're not a headline. You lay the oiled cloth on the floor and the blanket on that, and your coat on top of both, because cold tries from below as eagerly as above. If you had brush, you'd use it. You don't, so you use order and patience. Fire tempts you. You resist unless you can make it without smoke. Smoke needs draw. Draw needs a chimney. A candle is better small, steady, easier to feed. You set it in a tin and it turns your cave from terminal to survivable. You ration warm the way you ration food. 10 minutes of candle, 5 minutes of dark. You press the horse's muzzle now, and then reassure it with the same voice you use on scared children who pretend they're not. You eat on schedule, even if you're not hungry mind over stomach, because cold eats your sugars while your pride makes speeches. You sip water. Not gulp snow melted on the tongue is theft. You tuck one spare sock under your shirt and put the other spare on now, if you must. Then move your toes until the pain tells you blood is obeying. Pain is not an enemy. Out here, pain is a telegram that says still yours. You keep your hands. You put them in your armpits. You rotate mitt-liners. You ban words like later and probably. Later is warm fiction. Probably is a blizzard's favorite joke. Time gets weird. Your circle of air is a room. The knife you sharpened last fall is a small god. The blanket is a country. The horse's breath is a clock. You count to 100 and touch every knot on the line as if it's a bead on a rosary. Present, present, present. You sing a stupid song you hate because stupid songs have great timing. You imagine the meeting house stew like it's on the other side of a door. You do not, under any circumstances, nap. If the white lifts enough to bargain, you try a tethered. Scout. You fix the line to the wagon, knot it around your waist, take your hooked stick, and walk exactly 20 paces windward, probing every step. If you don't find the fence line in 20, you don't find it in 40. You backtrack with your free hand sliding along the line, mid-hand over mid-hand, and you do not look up, because looking is lying today. You crawl the other way on. The second scout, because crawl puts your eyes in the world the wind makes, not the world you wish. If you touch wire, not drift victory, you clip your line to the wire, not to your own cleverness, and you stay low and shuffle along it until you've proven the direction twice. Only then do you bring the horse, and you tie short you won't be the man. The paper writes about who found the fence and then let the horse pull him under it on a drifted stretch. You cut the wire if you must and fix it in April. The neighbor will thank you for choosing spring over pride. If the white doesn't lift, you wait. That's not surrender, that's strategy. The storm spends itself the way men do, fast and loud, then slower and mean, then ashamed of itself by morning. You punch the vent hole clear every half hour. You chew, you sip, you flex, you swear. You count. When the edge of the world finally becomes a shape wagon, then wheel, then the black elbow of the fence, you exit deliberate. You leave nothing loose. You coil the line. You thank the horse with your hand and a word you'll pretend later you didn't say out loud. Town is closer than it was because you paid attention. The stake road, the settlement built in November, appears one stake at a time, willow ones, every 50 yards with rags tied high so they show above most drifts. Someone risked fingers to plant those when the ground was still persuadable. Someone else walked the line last week and put fresh rags where sun made ghosts of the old ones. Community is a winter technology. Infrastructure is what you call kindness. After you pound it into ground, you arrive at the store looking like a creature the snow made brows white, scarf glazed, mitts steaming where your breath tried to turn them into armor. The door opens and heat hits you like a slap. You don't step too close to the stove. You kneel in that middle distance again while your body remembers how to be comfortable without breaking. Someone presses a mug into your hands. Someone else takes the bridle with that reverence people save for tools that saved a life. And then, because Prairie charity is practically everyone goes to work on preventing the next version of your story. The men check the stake roadmap tacked to the wall, a scribble of lines and names that says who's responsible for which stretch this week. A woman refills the storm boxes for the folks who arrive without their own. The storekeeper takes your list and whittles it to musts. Weight is danger, and he will not let you haul a barrel of pride when a half sack of flour and the medicines are the point. A boy rubs down your horse with straw and tells it a secret about spring. You buy what you can, barter what you must, promise what you'll keep. On the way home the sky is honest blue and the road is the road again, because you've tied it to the world with stakes and rope and sense. You travel on other people's foresight, and that is the opposite of weakness. The sun gets low, the house shows as a dark square set in light, and you feel the old human rush at recognizing a thing that kept its promise. You back the wagon to the door so the vestibule can do its quiet miracle. Inside, the room is bright, with evening work, mitts steam on their rack. A kettle nags happily. The ledger waits open for the day's arithmetic of food turned into time. You eat without speeches. You tell the story without editing, including the part where you almost chose wrong and then didn't. The children listen with big eyes because stories like this are textbooks out here, and exams come without warning. Before bed, you hang the line on its peg, coil neat as a moral. You set out tomorrow's flat person of clothes on the floor, arranged in the order they'll go on. You drop a pebble into the jar on the shelf, marked rules that worked. A silly family ritual that isn't silly at all. The jar is half full of small, dark stones. It looks like certainty. The world will ask again, stay or go. It always does. But each time you answer with systems instead of heroics, you move winter one step from predator to puzzle. Puzzles can be solved better yet, shared next. We stop pretending the lone settler wins and tell the truth the prairie kept, repeating until we listened. No one survives a hard winter alone. The watch, the common fuel, the Sunday stews, the stake roads and storm boxes. This is the machinery of a community that has decided, together, to see spring. Asterisk, the town that decided not to die. Lone fire keeps a family alive. A web of fires keeps a town. Sometime after the first hard winter, the one that taught everyone the price of pride, this settlement stopped behaving like scattered cabins and started behaving like a machine. Not a pretty machine, an effective one. The kind that runs on chores, schedules, and stubborn promises people keep even when no one is looking. It begins before daylight, when the wind still sounds like a saw in the rafters. The winter watch makes its rounds, two figures moving from house to house with lanterns hooded against the gale, shoulders touching in the deeper drifts so they don't lose the line of each other. Their job is simple and unsentimental. Look for signs of life, smoke from a pipe, a path cleared, a light nudging the frost on a window. If a chimney is dark too long, they don't stand on politeness. They knock, they call, and if the door doesn't answer, they enter. No one calls it rude. Out here, privacy means we'll leave your letters alone. It doesn't mean we'll let you die tidy. One January, the watch saved a whole house by arriving uninvited. Snow had corked the Johnsons' chimney. Smoke curled down while the family slept. The watchers walked into a room that looked peaceful and wrong blankets rising, faces slack in a way that made the skin crawl. They kicked the door wide, cracked every vent, dragged bodies into air that hurt to breathe and therefore mattered. By noon, the Johnsons were grey and angry at headaches. The watch took the anger gladly. Anger that talks is a better sound than silence that doesn't. By sunrise, the path roster is already in motion. A chalkboard in the meeting house tells who is clearing what today. Miller, Welter Hansen, Hansen to school. Clark, store to church, church to Kittredge. Paths are arteries. A blocked one risks a limb. You shovel your assignment first, then your own yard. Nobody needs a sermon to understand the order. A child could recite the logic. If the well is open, everyone drinks. If the school is open, children are warm while adults work. If the store is open, medicine moves. The chalkboard humbles and relieves because it answers the morning's worst question. What should I do first? With handwriting. Fuel is a personal panic until the common pile turns it into a communal calculation. Behind the church, a fence breaks the wind around a tall, ugly pyramid of everything that burns. Cords of riverwood, stacked corn cobs in grain sacks, bundles of grass twisted into knots, a covered bin of brown coal cut from a bluff. Even a neat wall of fuel bricks made from straw and manure, the German method, drying under a slanted roof. A small box with a hinged lid holds paper scraps and a stub. Pencil, and on bad days, a gloved hand writes a name, a date, and what was taken. Peterson 2, sacks cobs. 8 grass knots. No one sneaks. You write it down because you'll pay it back in April. And if you can't pay in fuel, you'll pay in labor stake road duty. Night watch. A week of repairs at the meeting house. The ledger doesn't judge. It balances. Inside. The meeting house is the town's other ledger, the one that measures stomachs against weeks. Jars line a back shelf. Beans, kraut, pickled beets, a tight row of apples that still smell faintly like September. A black book lists what's been pledged this season. Aims for pints kraut, lend bag of flour, Kittredge to hams when butchered, when a family's cellar floods or mice find what they shouldn't. the black book opens without speeches. Pride gets left in the vestibule with the snow on your boots. Inside, there's only arithmetic and grace. At noon on Sundays, matter the week's weather or news, the town eats together. Not because they're sentimental, but because Sunday stew solves 50 problems at once. The schoolhouse stove runs hot. Kettles big enough to baptize a hog bubble and mutter. Each family brings what they can. A quart of beans, a heel of salt. Pork, shaved thin as honesty. A pint of last summer's tomatoes. A handful of barley. A glorious onion. Children deliver these treasures with the solemnity of acolytes. Women stir with long-handled paddles. Men rotate at the stove door, tending fire the way they tend fences. Slow, exact, no waste. A fiddler saws out tunes that sound like work. Songs for a kitchen, the old stories get told again, the ones that turn lessons into memory, how the roof blew off, and 30 hands put it back in one afternoon. How a rope and a teacher delivered 16 small souls, alive, through white number. One pretends the stories are new. That's not the point. The point is gluing the town back together after a week of being sandblasted apart. There's a care roster now. 2, formal as a church bulletin. 3 names each week under visits. 2 morning, 1 evening because stubborn men won't ask for help, and winter eats both food and courage. Widow Ames, whose hands shake when the wind hammers at night, finds herself with 3 women in her kitchen on Thursday, chopping onions and talking nonsense while they secretly inventory her. Cellar and accidentally leave 2 jars behind. Old Kittredge, whose hearing surrendered years ago, gets a boy to shovel his path and a girl to read a chapter loud as a sermon so the house has words in it. The boy grumbles and learns to listen. The girl blushes and learns to stand straight when her voice matters. Both come home with cheeks lit by something stoves can't manage. Knowledge is rationed out loud before the frosts, not hoarded. Come September, the town runs winter school for evenings in the church, with benches packed and lanterns lined like a runway. Night 1, heat banking, creosote. What to do when the pipe roars like joy, it's not. How to pick stones that won't explode. Why a canary is insurance and not a pet. Night 2, food root cellar lungs, vents, high and low, sand barrels for carrots. How sauerkraut makes teeth stay put. How to keep apples from lying to potatoes. Night 3, clothing wool under leather, mittens over pride, moccasins that bend. Why cotton is treacherous. Night 4, storms rope knots every 2 paces, stake roads and rag flags. Why a snow cave wants a curve, how to scout on a line. How not to die because you felt silly waiting. Newcomers sit in front and try not to look green. Veterans heckle kindly and demonstrate. The Lakota family camped on the South Ridge comes each year, invited formally and paid in beef and gratitude to teach orientation and wind sense. They show how a door faces the sun and not your vanity. They show how to wrap a face so breath escapes. Without icing your own shield, why sleeping heads belong low in a teepee and children go high in a cabin. They laugh at a Boston coat and then fix it. Systems replace speeches. The stake road board in the store lists stretchers and stewards, fence, bend to creek, Clark and Ames. Every 3 days those names change, because roads are like fires, they go out if you don't feed them. The storm boxes by every door are standardized now. 2 liner mitts in oiled cloth, a waxed match tin, a palm-sized candle, a strip of canvas, a rope loop, 2 fingers of Pemmican, a scribbled list of the Whiteout rules in words you can read, while your brain begs you to sit down and make a snow pillow, And because winter eats the mind before the body sometimes, the town invented company on purpose. Thursday is lights night. 3 houses on rotation trim wicks twice, burn lamps an hour longer, and declare themselves open. You come not because you're lonely, though you are, but because the rule says this is where cards are played. Mending is done in a pile. Songs are tried in keys that don't suit them. A toddler falls asleep under a table. An old couple holds hands in the warm shadow. A teenage boy tunes the fiddle too many times and then plays something that makes the room forget wind for 3 minutes. No one cures sadness, exactly. They thin it. The church stove becomes a municipal furnace on the worst weeks. Doors stay unlocked. Someone's always tending the grate. Children with coughs nap on benches between quilts. Babies get changed on the pastor's desk, who pretends not to notice. Men who haven't spoken civilly in 3 summers play checkers like they're on the same side of something which they are. When fuel is tight, the stove's heat becomes a commodity that does triple duty. Cook, warm, dry. The kettle on top runs constant for tea, for thawing boots, for steam to put back into air that has learned too many sharp tricks. Not everything is gentle. Enforcement exists because soft rules die in hard weather. When a man is caught using the common pile for a private binge-big blaze, pipe raw, door wide while he hauls, without writing it down, 3 neighbors show up with careful faces and a ledger. He surrenders the extra now and signs his name. Under 3 weeks of path duty later, shame is light and quick, the cold is neither. He does his penance and the town keeps him, because exiling fools is expensive. Teaching them is a better investment. The town measures itself not by how the strong do, but by the edge cases. The lame, the old, the mother alone, while her husband hauls grain ahead of a storm. If the edge survives, the center is fine. So there. Our rotation billets 2 weeks here. 2 weeks therefore anyone whose house can't hold heat this season. The family moves with their quilts and 1 kettle and takes turns crowding different kitchens. Privacy thins. Survival thickens. Come spring, the billet family adds 3 days' work to the host's planting as thanks. The ledger notes it. The ledger also smiles. Every system has a story that made it necessary. The lantern posts along. The main path went up after a man died 20 yards from the meeting house door, because the wind erased the world between his last footstep and heat. The covered barn runs got built after 3 people lost toes doing chores in storms the rope couldn't argue with. The vestibules multiplied after a child's cough worsened from a house that inhaled the night every time the door opened. Second vent got cut after a family woke on the floor with headaches and gratitude. Improvement isn't pride out here. It's a refusal to pay the same bill twice. And then there are the small economies that look like kindness and are really policy. Seamstress Len keeps a box of Mend It Now, near her door patches cut to mitten size, lengths of waxed thread, needles in cork. If a man ducks in with a torn coat in January, she fixes it while he stands. He owes her an hour in April mending. Fancy doesn't argue. The blacksmith cleans creosote pipes for widows and charges the town in a currency called Keep the Bellows Going When I'm Sick. The storekeeper keeps a shelf labeled February that you can only reach with. The winter committee's note. It holds the medicine, the lamp oil, the pound of coffee that keeps 3 men from making mistakes on a night watch. No heroics required. Just systems that assume failure is a frequent visitor and plan to take its hat. The town even has a rule. Of words for winter, no big decisions till April. You don't sell land in February. You don't declare feuds. You don't announce devastations you can't fix yet. The mind shrinks in cold. April gives it back its size. People still break the rule. People forgive them more easily when they do. No one pretends this machine runs. Without friction, there are sharp words in doorways. There are days when a man hides in a barnstall to cry where hay will keep his sound. There are nights when a widow lies awake and counts the reasons she shouldn't get up, and then gets up anyway because the winter watch will knock and she doesn't want to look dead by mistake. There is pettiness about stew recipes and the great annual debate about whether sauerkraut belongs in everything the Germans win by persistence. There is the fiddler who only knows 4 tunes and plays them like he's paid by the hour. There is the pastor who preaches too long and the woman who coughs through it and the child who laughs at both and saves the room from itself. But when the wind howls like it's hungry and the sky forgets it was ever blue, this town, this ugly, brilliant machine decides not to die. Over and over, quietly, with ropes strung and paths shoveled and stew stirred and ledgers balanced, and mittens repaired and songs played on fiddles that could use new strings. 100 small decisions that add up to spring. And when the thaw finally starts, the drips ticking from eaves like a new clock, the paths turning to brown rivers, the first dumb fly waking up on a windowsill, the machine doesn't pat itself on the back. It looks around and asks, what did we learn? What failed? What stood? Then it fixes 3 things and writes to more on a list for June. Survival is a workshop, not a victory lap. Tomorrow, we pay respect where it's due to the people who knew this place before wagons came, who taught the wind's grammar and the sun's angle and the logic of curved shelters. The Prairie had teachers long before it had students in Boston coats, first teachers. What the land already knew long before wagons scratched lines across the prairie. The people who belonged to this wind had already solved its hardest riddles. They didn't ask the plains to be gentle. They learned its grammar. Where newcomers piled boards against weather, the nations of this country, Lakota and Dakota, Nakota, Cheyenne, Arapaho, Crow, Mandan, and Hidatsa along the river towns, Plains, Cree, and others, on the north edge read winter like a season tracker. Reading snow, out here, primitive is a word ignorance uses before it shivers. Start with shelter not, a house that resists the wind with corners, but a shape that talks to it. The tipi isn't a tent, it's a machine. Poles splayed to a wide base grip the earth. The cone slants so the gale must glide, not punch. A double wall the outer hide or canvas, and the inner liner creates a chimney of calm where air rises. Pulls smoke up, draws fresh breath low. On a day that would bend a clapboard cottage like a reed. Smoke lifts clean through smoke flaps, set with little poles like hands shaping wind. Entry faces the sun, not your pride. The back shoulder presents itself to the north where the hurt lives. When snow stacks high, the tipi welcomes it. The drift hems the skirt and the earth lodge of air inside grows sweeter, steadier. Settlers, noticed and slowly learned, build curves, make lungs. Face south, inside that space is another lesson zones, not rooms. Sleeping robes edge the warmest air. The fire sits center, not just to cook, but to organize. A low stone circle remembers last night's glow. Above, a tripod suspends kettles at precise heights. Inches mean hours of simmer or minutes of boil. Tools have homes. Parflesh cases stiff, rawhide boxes hold food and gear against damp and vermin. When it's time to move, the lodge breaks like a sentence into words you can carry. Contrast that with settlers strapping a house to a place, like an argument. Mobility wasn't a preference, it was strategy. Go where the bison go, where the cottonwoods promise fuel, where the cut banks keep the north wind guessing. Movement is also insulation, clothing. The winter teaches a cruel vocabulary, and indigenous wardrobes spoke it fluently. Brain-tanned buckskin bends with a body, breathes when effort rises, sheds snow and sleet when the sky spits. Over that, robes stitched from bison hides hair, side out in a blow, hair side in when the cold is clean and dry. Hands go into mittens that are systems, not ornaments. Fur inside, leather outside. Cut roomy enough to trap warm air, tight enough at the wrist to stop the thief. Feet wear moccasins that flex and feel, lined with rabbit or bison hair in deep. Cold, with a slip of dry grass added for loft and swapped out daily so damp never lingers. Settlers who traded Boston boots for that kit kept their toes. The phrase civilized footwear became a private joke the first time. A man walked home with living feet, and then the micro tricks that don't make headlines and do save lives. A face wrap that lets breath out along the cheek, instead of into a scarf that turns to ice. A smear of rendered fat across nose and brow as windshield. Hood shapes cut to throw the gale aside the way a canoe prow parts water. The lesson that layering is not more clothes but more air-controlled pockets of stillness between garments, where heat can live without being bullied by sweat. The habit of easing a seam, loosening a flap before the work starts so the body doesn't drown its own fire, where trees were scarce. Heat began with knowledge instead of logs. Dry willow brush and sage, gathered by memory because memory knows where snow drifts thin on south-facing banks. Dried bison, dung buffalo chips, stacked not as a shame but as a currency. A small coal keeper of punky wood or a turtle shell, lined with ash to carry the day's ember between camps, so fire starts as a continuation, not a negotiation. Stones selected by kind, dense, dark, never river wet heated for beds, wrapped, swapped, placed at feet, in cradles, under knees. Settlers borrowed that habit and called the night easier. Food wasn't just calories, it was culture engineered. For winter, the nations of the plains didn't invent pemmican for romance. They made it to break winter's back. Lean meat dried to brittleness, pounded to powder, rendered fat warmed to silk. Berries, chokecherry, buffalo berry for temps and what your teeth and gums will thank you for in February. Packed hard and clean, it keeps without asking favors. One slab in a parfleche is a week's decisions you no longer have to make. Traveling bands could move in any weather because meals were portable heat. Later, a trader, a scout, then a settler's. Family trapped by a storm lived because someone had listened in autumn when a woman with deft hands said, "Add more fentanyl, more." Mobility also changes winter math. Villagers along rivers Mandan had Datsul lived in earth lodges that made sod houses look like apprentices. Walls of willows plastered with clay and sod, thick as a promise, roofs mounded with the same and topped. By a smoke hole you manage with a bison hide cover on a pole. An earth lodge holds a winter like a song holds a note steady, carrying entire planted around them, cache pits larders in the ground, shaped and lined to keep grain and squash and dried meat safe from teeth and freeze. People who rotate, camps according to season, don't escape winter. They negotiated on better terms. Navigation was body-held, not map-folded. Winter trails stitch across the plains along wind logic. Go high when the crust will carry you. Drop into the coulees when it won't. Read snow language, sastrugi pointing like compass needles. Cornices that whisper not here. Read sky, ring. Around the moon means ice in the air and change behind it. A blue hard as iron means brittle cold by morning. Read animals. Bison put their shoulders to the storm in a line that tells you the wind's true, not the gust's lies. Crows lift late, on a frost that will break by noon. Settlers learned to look up from wheels and down from worry and start seeing what was shouting softly all along. Community wasn't charity, it was architecture. Kin networks braided across camps. A storm that flattened one lodge sent its people into another without speeches. Giveaways rebalanced luck before winter tested its wealth, measured less in piles than in circulation. The blizzard stories settlers told about towns choosing not to die by pooling fuel, tearing empty houses for heat, keeping stews alive in a church, stove those were new to them and old to the prairie. Mutual aid wasn't a revelation, it was a rule. Even time had a winter shape. Winter counts, pictographic calendars painted on buffalo robes. One symbol for each year, the year of the smallpox, the year of the double comet, the year the ice took the black horse. Survival knowledge didn't live only in hands. It lived on hides and in stories, so a child could consult a century the way a farmer consults a ledger. The year a teacher tied rope around students in a whiteout would have earned its glyph. The decision to string guidelines through a settlement the following autumn would have been the lesson that glyph carried forward. There's humility in the craft you can touch. A cradle board, lashed and fur-lined, keeps a baby close to warmth and safely away from fires and hooves, and can be hung inside a lodge where air is best. A travois drags behind a horse or dog, poles doubling as tippy frame at day's end. A snow shield of hides on the storm side of a camp steals the wind's appetite without wrestling it to the ground. None of it wastes. Everything does to jobs. Sometimes 3. And there are the rules that feel like poems because that's how memory holds best. Don't sleep in clothing that worked. It's wet with the work you don't feel. A fire that smokes is asking for a different wind, not more wood. The first step into white is a step you can undo. A lone hunter is a weather report. A line of hunters is supper. When newcomers listened, winters softened. A settler moved his door to face south and placed his stove where a fire belongs center. Not penance at one end danned, the house stopped feeling like a coffin with windows. Another rolled away a passion for windows after hearing a quiet chuckle and the phrase, "Let the sun in. Don't let the wind find you." Another learnt to bank snow around a wall instead of shoveling pride high and wide. Another traded gloves for mittens, boots for moccasins, a stubborn jaw for an open one. The land is liberal with its lessons when you're willing to be a student. This is not a hymn to a vanished past so much as a correction to a flattering myth. The frontier wasn't a blank page sophisticated men wrote upon. It was a book already written in a script many refused to learn. The people who taught those first winters out here didn't do it with pamphlets. They did it by showing, by teasing, by saving lives without keeping score. Sometimes they were paid in tin beads, tobacco. Sometimes they were paid years later when a settler's son hauled a log or a woman mended a tear or a rope found. The right post because someone had watched a lodge line and understood its reason. So picture a cold, so clean it rings. To figures in a Boston coat that's learned humility, one in a robe that has never forgotten stand on a rise and look at the same wind, hear different things, trade notes, door there. The elder says, pointing where the sun can help and the hill can block. Flaps like this, he says, and fingers show angles that make smoke obedient. Walk the coulee, not the crest, he adds, when the sky hints at mischief. And the settler nods, because the last whiteout taught numbers the hard way. Then, because humans are built for more than instruction, the elder laughs at some small foolishness, and the settler laughs too, and winter still mean. Still honest becomes a little more human, dash-sized. By spring you can see what listening buys. Fewer blackened ears, fewer chimneys that roar like joy before they roar like loss. More houses with vestibules that act like lodge liners. More children wearing flat-person layers arranged like a plan instead of a pile. More ropes knotted at hand distance, not just about right. More pemmican tucked away for when the cellar is a room of echoes. More maps sketched in the mind where the stake road meets the bison trail, because both follow the same logic. Easiest path, safest shelter, shortest fight with weather. Respect is not an apology. It's a tool. The settlers who lived to tell winter stories that helped you sleep did not beat the prairie. They joined the long conversation the prairie was already having with people who knew its temper. If you want to survive a place, you borrow its oldest answers and you add your newest care. You build a stove with a liner's wisdom, a cellar with a cache pit's cunning, a town with a camp's reciprocity. You teach your children to thank both. Tomorrow we step back into the settler, cabins with that knowledge in our pockets, and face the thing that winter uses when cold and hunger fails the mind. Cabin fever, long dark, the calendar that won't move. How do you keep a house from surviving while the people inside it fade? The frontier had medicines for that too. Work that matters, rituals that anchor, and jokes loud enough to push back. The night asterisk, the long dark. Keep your head warm, listen Suno Zara. Cold outside is loud, obvious, a bully you can see. But winter has a second weapon that speaks softly and works from the inside. The long dark it chews on patience, thins out courage, stretches hours like bad taffy. Out here, you don't just heat a room, you heat a routine, you warm a mind. Otherwise the house survives, and the people inside it quietly don't. This part is about that fight. Dimag. Godam Rakna. Yerbees in the Ren. Kahissa. Hai. Start simple. Time is your first stove. In summer, the sun is your boss. In winter, you appoint one. The family keeps a house clock made from chores and bells. Dawn bell, one iron spoon. On the kettle up, stoke, breath, tea. Mid-morning bell, mid-swap, fire check, cellar tally. Noon bell, bowls out, soup in, story short. Dusk bell, water fetched, coals banked. Lantern, wicks, trimmed bus, is kadar. The point isn't drama. It's meter. Rhythm shrinks hours to bites. A mind that knows what's next argues less with the dark. You set stations like you're running a tiny factory, mending by the east window, shelling at the table, whittling by the stove. Lessons in the warmest corner under the loft. Each station has a box stool scraps, a list in big letters telling where you left off yesterday so you can jump straight in without that drift of Abkaya Karoon. You rotate stations every hour. Bodies move, minds change, gears. No one sits long enough for shadows to stick. Even sadness, when it visits, grows lighter when it has to walk. Light itself is medicine. Kerosene is precious, but despair costs more. So you practice bright and dim on purpose. Mornings, 2 lamps trimmed high for an hour to chase the night. Out of corners, midday, wicks low. Let daylight carry the load. Evening, lamps turned back up for reading and the hour of noise music. Cards, a pot lid, tapped like a drum if that's all you own. Then one lamp left modest for the quiet hour. The mind's cool down to ensure sleep comes honest. Rot ko halka rako, nind apni, radund leti high. You build rituals the way you built the vestibule, deliberate, drafts-upping morning. Gratitude takes 60 seconds, not sermons. Each person names one small, good thing, warm mitts. A straight seam, the dog's sigh. Nightly 3 breath, audit by the stove. Inhale slow, name the rooms, 3 softest sounds, kettle tick. Rope creak, child's murmur, exhale slow. Frontier people don't say mindfulness, but they practice it because anxiety hates attention. Sans Gino, Hawa Keo Gino, Fear Kamoshi, Keo Gino Daimog, Naram Hojota, HAI.work is icebreaker and lifeline. Not all work is equal in the long dark. You privilege visible progress, things that show today that tomorrow will be kinder. Piles are proofs. A neat stack of kindling, 20 feet of rope reknotted, 10 rag balls for next month's rug, 6 mittliners dried and fluffed, a row of jars relabeled in a hand the house recognizes. Leave these visible trophies on a shelf. Near the door, every trip past is a nudge. Deco, Kachhua, high age, Bihoga. Winter respects, receipts. Children get missions that matter, not make-believe help. The fire scout holds a little slate and chalk. Each hour, jot the stoves, mood, good draw, slow, need scrape. The water buckets crust thin, thick. The kitchen temperature, in words, nose cold, nose is fine. It's data, yes, but it's also dignity. The string captain manages the mitten line, wet on the left, dry on the right, rotate every half hour, keep count. Kids who carry the rhythm carry less worry. Bochin, Ko, Zimadari do. Wo Bouj, Nahi, Sahara, Samashtahain. Talk has rules in winter, because words can either warm or take heat. The house keeps a 3-lane road. Lane 1 planning short, specific, today's tasks. Lane 2 teaching, share a skill, 1 person at a time, hands-on. Lane 3 story after supper. Off limits till April, judgments you can't act on. The settlement wrote a motto for this. No big decisions in February. If anger rises, you schedule it. We'll fight Monday after chores, and half the time the need evaporates. Heat saved. Goosebod, Manabi, mittens, palto, music. Is an inside fire. Some nights you have a fiddle. Most nights you have voices, spoons, a table to drum. You keep a house songbook, lyrics on folded paper, big letters, more rhythm than range. Newcomers stumble on purpose, so everyone laughs the same direction. Laughter is circulation for the mood. So is story duty. Each night a different person tells a true tale with one rule. It must sharpen a skill, the rope you should have cut and the time you finally did. The scarf wrap that saved an ear. The joke that kept a boy counting instead of sitting down in white. Stories are software updates for the whole crew. Daston B, Dewai Hottie, HAI. Then games, built for mind heat. The alphabet walk. Pick a theme. The land knows tools, fuels, birds, chores. Go A to Z without repeating. Pace the room while you list walking keeps the blues from sticking. The noticing game. Close eyes. One person moves 3 objects slightly. Open eyes. Spot the changes. Clap for the shy child who finds the third. The knot race. Time each other, tying 2 pieces apart. Overhand knots. Blindfolded. rope laid across. Knees because play should also practice. There's thank you poker. 5 small chores listed face down, draw and do. First to finish, theirs gets the last slice of Johnny cake. Silly, maybe. Effective, absolutely, asterisk. Winter wages a campaign against sleep. Too early, too late, too much, too thin. You defend with sleep anchors. Wake and rise at the same time, even if the sky lies. Naps are tools, not escapes to 20 minutes. Blanket not quilt, chair not bed. If the mind races at night, the house uses worry. Paper write it down. Fold it once, put it under the kettle, let steam hold it for morning. And the warm hands rule. Never go to bed cold. 2 minutes with a stone wrapped in cloth, hands tucked to ribs, then blanket. Sardi say, Pehel nind wan na nin. Sapele. Sardi some days will still break bones you can't see. That's when you pull the emergency bright, 2 extra lamps for an hour. The best jam opened without apology. The secret coffee tin cracked, even if it wasn't Sunday. A song you save for real trouble. You call a neighbor, minute open the door, shout to the next house so both families wave. Proof of life crosses adrift. If the house feels cramped with sadness, you change the shape, move the table 6 inches, flip the quilt on the wall, swap the stool and bucket. Small geometry, fresh mind. Thora sabedal dudil, kayo, naya hawa, mildy high. There's a ledger for spirits too. On the shelf sits a jar labeled rules that worked flat pebbles dropped in at day's end. Each pebble represents one choice that kept the house steady. The jar fills like a second kind of food. Next to it, a small mercy bookwin. Someone snaps, and someone else chooses not to. Write the mercy down in 6 words. In April, you read the mercy book on the porch and laugh at how close you came to being fools, widows, elders. The soul targets them like an archer. The town answers with rotation company. 2 afternoons a week, someone arrives with work to do in their kitchen, not for it peeling, mending, kindling, sorting. There's a difference between doing for and doing with. The latter keeps a person stitched to the day. And the knock rule. If you haven't heard a voice from that house by noon, you knock. If no answer, you enter. Pride is a summer crop. Winter grows different virtues. Dastak du zindagi, jawab, deti, hi. Faith helps if you have it. If you don't, make Sabbath anyway, not for doctrine, but for rest shape. 1 day a week, no heavy talk, no heavy lifts after noon, stew that simmers all day, hands that hold. A psalm or a poem or a dirty limerick whispered behind a grin so the mind remembers. It has edges that laughter can round. When the worst bilkul bureau rolls in, you use the 5 things you can touch ladle, mitt, rope, quilt, cup. 4 things you can hear kettle tick, dog sigh, wind, seam, breath. 3 things you can smell, tallow, wool, onions. 2 you can see lamp halo, frost feathery on the pane. 1 thing. You believe spring happens. Say them out loud. The body returns to the room. The mind follows. Science hasn't named it out here, but grandmothers did. You also teach permission as skill. Permission to step outside into the vestibule and stand alone for a full minute. Permission to ask for the warm spot by the stove without apology. Permission to skip a card game and sew in the quiet. Permission to weep and keep stirring the pot, tears falling where salt was going anyway. Jazzbot B, Calm K, Soth, Chal Sokt Hain, and you keep learning on purpose. The house runs a small school because brains that grow don't fray as fast. Monday, knots and splices. Tuesday, stove care, creosote scrape, flue logic. Wednesday, root cellar, physics, vents, high, low. Thursday, rope and white, scout rules. Friday, sewing repairs and leather tallowing. Saturday, music and measures. A new song, clap a new rhythm. Everyone teaches once. Teaching is glue, it makes your own knowledge stick. Josike, wo kudsab says zyada sikta high. Cabin fever is real asli cheese. The signs show up like frost. Whispers get sharp, silent. People go silenter. Small spills become tragedies. A door slam sounds like a verdict. The house has a signal for that one tap on the table with a spoon. It means reset. Gloves up on the line. Everyone take 10 steps in place. Drink water. 2 deep breaths. Swap stations. The first time feels silly. The 4th time saves a day. And then you hunt beauty the way you hunt fuel. Beauty that doesn't need June. The frost fern on the inside pane that looks like a river delta you've never seen. The way steam halos a child's head like a saint painted wrong. The sound rawhide makes when it stops being stiff and starts being useful under a warm hand. You say these things out loud, not to perform, but to catch them before they blow away. Khobsurti, beiroziroti, Hairuki Rosie. When the sky finally brightens a thumb with Thurlia, and the path outside learns what shape it had last fall. The long dark loosens. The tricks you practiced were not tricks, they were craft. They hold in other storms, other years. You won't brag, you'll wash the lamp chimneys, put the mercy book on a shelf. Empty the rules jar into a burlap sack, save the pebbles for next season. And step out into a day that smells almost like mud. Tomorrow we go back to hands and heat the repairs. Winter wrote on your walls. The improvements a hard season teaches even stubborn people. Better roofs, smarter vents, covered runs, fences. That convince snow to settle somewhere else. Calm Dobera Shuramaga is Dafa better, Tariq say. Because the best reward for surviving is building so you don't have to survive quite so hard the next time. Asterisk. Build it so winter has to work harder when thaw finally starts. Drip, drip, like a cautious clockute. Don't sigh and stretch. You inventory. Winter just handed you a list, written in ice and smoke. The smart answer isn't pride, it's a hammer. Agli. Daffa, Asan Banani High, you mutter, make it easier next time. Start at the top, where weather begins, the roof, snow sits. Water finds, wind pries. If your shingle's lifted, the pitch argued with physics. You raise it, a touch enough, so snow slides when it should, stays when it must. A light blanket insulates. You add a drip edgevin, if it's just a ripped strip from a tin flour cancel. Meltwater falls clear of walls instead of sneaking back under. Where last storm forced drifts into the lee eve, you drive a short snow fence 2 wagon lengths out, slatted not solid, because wind obeys porosity. Solid walls make anger. 50% gaps make obedience. Rule of thumb, the old hands repeat. Set the fence about 20 times its height, upwind of what you're protecting. Drift will lay down where you tell it. Hawa, Ko, Bakana, Hai, Lana, Nahin. The chimney tells a harsher truth. If it roared like joy, you had creosote fat as bacon in there. Spring job 1, sweep, top and bottom. You build a clean out 3 bricks and a tin door at the base so you aren't on the roof every time sense is required. You fit a spark cap wire screen bent to a crown so roof won't light when January gets ideas. You also build a draft hood with tin and stubbornness. Crosswind won't shove smoke back into house if the hood splits gusts first. You test by palm. Warm draw without smoke in your eyes is correct. Hot pipe that pops and chatters is a sermon you'd better hear. Walls. Next, chinking shrank. Wind remembered your name. You repacked the seams with a ruthless mix mud, straw, hair, a little manure if pride melts faster than snow, then face it with lime if you can steal some from a riverbank burn. Inside, you hang winter quilts as movable walls, but this year, you sew weighted hems so drafts can't crawl under and steal your sleep. Remember how frost formed on the north wall behind the bed. You move the bed 6 inches off, let air circle. Trapped air is wet air, and wet air writes coughs. Chotasi jaga, body see. Rahat, windows, pretty as expensive here. If you can spare glass, you fit a storm sash inside second frame. Oiled cloth, if not, glass creating a still air sandwich. If you can't, you stretch greased paper tight as a drum and seal edges with flour paste. You add curtains that close high and low, not just in the middle. And you train the house to open blinds midday for sun, then shut early so heat doesn't go out sightseeing. A broken latch in January felt like a tragedy. In April, it becomes a hook and eye. You forge from scrap and never curse again. Floors and the line where house meets world. Last winter chewed there. You skirt the cabin boards, or even snow-packed. Straw, then earth so wind doesn't eat heat from beneath. You carve shallow drain swales around the base, sloped away so the thaw doesn't send a creak through your foundation. Root cellar ceiling sweated. You enlarge the high vent by a finger's width. Add a flap you can set with a notch stick. Zida koldu jab damp lage, band cardo jab thand, cot rahi ho. Low vent stays honest, so air keeps its gentle circle. Doors are where winter sneaks. You build a vestibule if you didn't 2 doors. 3 steps apart, so house doesn't inhale storm every time someone remembers a tool. On both doors you nail brush sweeps, bundled twigs stitched to a strip so gaps at the sill become a rumor. Inside the vestibule you set pegs high for mitts and a slanted rack for boots not on the stove. Not on the floor, but where heat moves, and leather doesn't die. You tack a small shelf for storm box, waxed matches, candle, face wrap, spare liner mitts, a bit of pemmican, a coil of rope. You stencil grab this in big letters because panic reads poorly. Asterisk. Between house and barn, you build what last January begged for. A covered run. Posts, scrapboards, canvas if you can scrounge it, hinged panels you can drop when wind rages and lift when you need light. Set the run a pace wide enough for 2. And a sled. Put hand ropes waist high both sides. Knots every 2 steps. Gloves remember knots when brains forget distance. Make the barn door swing in, not out. Snowdrifts don't argue with hinges, they bury them. Barn itself learns tricks from houses and lodgers. You raise feed off the floor to planks and block so thaw wet doesn't sour grain. You build a manure packlet bedding and dung layer and heat under hooves. Then cut a small high vent for that steam and troubled gases to escape. To vents low on the lee side feed fresh air. Animals breathe truth into a room, but they also steal it if you let air go still. The water trough gets a floating lidwood disc undercut so it sits in the hole. Lift, drink, drop which keeps a skin of warmer air over the surface and ice confused about where to grow. You bury a hot stone under the trough lip at dusk, wrapped in iron scrap if you've got it, so the rim doesn't glass over while you sleep. Heat wants reflection as much as fuel. You hang tin sheets, old biscuit tins, hammered flat behind the stove to bounce warmth and stop the wall from slow scorching. You set the stove on a sand bed in a box of board spark insurance you'll thank when a coal jumps. You keep an ash bucket with a lid outside the door. Never on the porch coals pretend they're dead. They lie. Sifted ash goes to traction. On the steps an interlie later for soap, because nothing in this house gets a single career. Water was an enemy most of January. Now it's a partner again. You fix the well curb, replace the worn windlass rope, tar the knot so it won't wick. If the wellhead froze often, you plant a quick windbreak brush fence, or a half circle of old boards so the calm keeps surface air from learning the wind's bad habits. You carve a drip trench from the pump spout so mud doesn't build a skating rink at the door, then scatter ash there like you're frosting a cake with dull grey. In back, you stack ice blocks you cut from the creek sawdust between layers under a roof of thatch because July will come with flies and a milk pail. And you'll be very happy you worked in March. Fuel belongs near but not on the house. Last. Winter's panic pile against the south wall grew mold and mice and regret. This spring you lay skids, stack with crossed corners, throw a slanted roof over it, and leave a gap to the cabin so embers don't shake hands with boards when wind gets curious. Buffalo chips and grass knots go in sacks under cover. High enough a thaw puddle can't flirt. Inside, you redraw the heat map. The stove wasn't wrong, your habits were. You moved the sleeping loft just 3 feet closer. The children will sweat less, and you'll sleep more without waking to tuck quilts over noses. You build a stone channel, a row of river rock under the bed's board, open toward the stoves, so stones warm by day and leak comfort by night. You swap gloves for mitts permanently on the barn peg, and you string the drying line where smoke wanders, not where it sits. Slow, dry, no scorched now, paths. Winter taught your yard to become a maze. You set stakes and rag flags for next year's stake road. Today, while the ground is gentle, every 50 paces, a willow wand drags high enough to rise above an average. Drift add another handspan, to be honest. You tuck a small map in the meeting house with names on segments. Stewardship rotates every 3 days, come January. You also move the outhouse to paces leeward and throw up a screen. Modesty is summer's word. Winter's is wind logic. You lay a gravel bed or broken crock pieces under the door so it doesn't freeze itself into a rumor at dawn. This is the season for templates. Make jigs for stormbox parts, for mitten patterns, for rope knots. Cut wooden gauges 2 pace, not spacing, flue gap size, vent openings. Right sizes right on the gauge so memory doesn't have to perform when your hands are stiff and your temper is short. Store them in a shared chest at the meeting house. Tools become infrastructure when they're standard. Napatol, kakam, karo, kalko shukriya. Karega community structures get their own spring list. The common fuel fence gets mended. Slats replaced in the places snow taught you were weak. The meeting house stove earns a second flue pipe section and a roof jack so drifts can't clap a lid on it. The lantern posts on main path trade cracked chimneys for whole glass. And a boy too cocky to be careful this winter has to polish every globe till it makes the room look twice as bright. The watch roster moves to a chalkboard that lives by the door from November to March. Names don't depend on memory anymore. Trees are far and few. Still, you plant for tomorrow. Willows near the seep, poplar cuttings along the north fence. They'll look like nothing for 3 seasons and then suddenly become shelter belts, living snow fences that bleed the wind's meanness into gentler air. You guard them from goats and from your own impatience. You tell the child who asks why plants so slow, Cune ka agla. Sadi, oras se agla bi. Cold repeats. So should wisdom. You build redundancy anywhere a single failure can kill. 2 vents, not 1. Rope on both sides of the passage. To clean mitt pairs in the storm box. To latches on the barn door, 1 you can work with mitts. 1 you can kick with a boot if hands have become lies. The sled now wears 2 hooks for the lead. If one fails in white, the other stays to finish the sentence. Error is a teacher. Make it a curriculum. The settlement keeps a notebook. No one writes in with pride, and everyone reads with relief. Winter lessons. Each entry gets a rule at the end. Smoke backed up at 3 a.m.'s no cap on chimney, fixed with pole and cussed words. Rule, cut second. Vent and add wire hood. Lost rope once, not spacing too long, hand missed. Rule, knots every 2 paces, not about right. Emma's ear, frost-nipped hood, shallow. Rule, patterns from Lakota neighbor. Deeper flap, breath gap. This book sits by the winter school lectern in September. People add to it with the same gravity they bring to baptisms. Repair becomes ritual because rituals stick. The town declares a fixing bee to Saturdays after the last hard freeze. Not a barn raising, smaller, sharper. Teams move fast. 1 crew does chimneys. 1 crews doors and sweeps. 1 sweeps flues and scolds for ash buckets on porches with cookies and kindness. 1 lays out stake road kits in neat bundles. Work ends with stew, fiddle, a roll call of the mercy book small. Forgiveness is granted in February, now read aloud and laughed into history. It's how a town turns survival into culture. Some improvements are cheap genius. A rope cleat by every door so the guideline clips fast instead of being knotted with cursing fingers. A face-wrap pegboard with cut lengths, child, woman, man sew. No one guesses when wind howls. A chalk mark, chest high, on barn posts at 2-pace intervals, so you can count your way even when lanterns lie. A pebble jar on the mantel labeled rules that worked every night. A stone goes in for 1 choice that made tomorrow easier. You'll pour it out in April and feel the weight of a winter you managed rather than endured. Asterisk, and finally, the houses. Voice, last season it creaked and you flinched. This season it creaks and you listen. That pop in the flue elbow means sweep soon. That whistle under the sill means brush, sweep needs love. That sweet hot smell means someone's set a mitten to. Close to tin. A cabin isn't just boards. It's a system that tells you what it needs if you stop pretending you already know. Gar Bolter High. SUNO. By the time the path turns from steel to mud and the first reckless fly-right circles in sun, your list is shorter than last year's. Roof edges shine with fresh tin. The vestibule swallows wind like a gentleman. The run to the barn is a hallway that laughs at drifts. The stake road has flags that could guide a blind man with a good hand. The common pile is neat. The lantern posts upright. The meeting house stove arrogant in the best way. You haven't beaten winter. That's not a game you win. You've raised the price it has to pay to hurt you. You've turned near misses into fixtures, panic into standard parts, bright ideas into community property. The difference between last January and the next one is not luck. It's lumber with memory and iron with intention. Tomorrow we close this journey where all good frontier stories end in the thaw and the reckoning. What stayed, what changed, what we carry forward when nights shorten and hands reach for seed instead of rope. Okri hiso fianind, holki si, ke soth, asterisk. Thaw and reckoning. What we carry forward, listen suno. The sound changes first. Not the big fanfare, no trumpets from the sky, just a shy dripping at the eaves tip. Tip tip, like a careful clock trying not to wake the house. Overnight, the yard that was steel becomes ragged lace. The rope to the barn sags instead of sings. The wind that used to argue now just clears its throat. You open the door and the cold still bites, but it bites and then lets go. Busitna, say fark, and your shoulders drop an inch you didn't know they were holding. Thaw is not a party, it's an audit. Winter hands you a ledger written in ice and smoke and small mercies, and you go line by line. The path you dug 1,000 times has slumped into brown rivers. You slope a trench so water behaves. The sled that hauled life all season earns grease on every hinge. The stove that stood guard gets its flue scraped clean, and someone Hamisha Koihota he saves the first fist of soft soot in a little jar as proof. Yabi. Mittens get turned right side, liners fluffed, leather rubbed with tallow like a thank you note in circles. The mercy book comes off the shelf, dog-eared, and you read 3 entries out loud while the kettle nags. 2/9, he snapped. She poured tea first, scolded second. 2/18, lantern cracked. Neighbor swapped chimneys before dawn. 3/1 kib, left rope unclipped. Old man clipped it and taught without shaming. People laugh now at moments that weren't funny. Then, laughter is spring's first crop. Outside, the settlement moves like a many-handed thing. At the fixing bee, men on ladders turn chimneys from threats into promises caps. Wired cleanouts cut, elbows resitted. Women stitch brush door sweeps and tack them to sills while they rehearse whiteout rules in between gossip. Children carry rag flags to the stake road and tie them high enough that even next January's pride can't pretend it forgot. Someone repairs the covered run panel that split under the 3 a.m. gale. Someone else adds a second latch you can kick with a boot if mitts become lies. These aren't decorations. They are memory-made, wood and wire. Graves soften too. There are winters that leave none and winters that don't. On the first real warm Sunday, the town walks no speeches, no brass just boots in mud, Aram say, to where names are carved shallow and true. Hands clear grass, straighten a stone, retie a ribbon that saw too much weather. No one gives grief instructions, it knows its way, but the visit turns loss from a ghost into a neighbor. Both are easier to live with, then the oldest work begins. Again the work that pretends it's about seeds, but is really about hope you can chew. The root cellar exhales the last of its breath. 2 onions that want to sleep forever, a turnip that looks like a knuckle. They go into a pot and make a poor rich soup that tastes like the end of a book you didn't know you were writing. The garden out back is still sullen, but you kneel and push your fingers into it anyway. Cold, yes. Dead, no. You crumble a handful and feel the grit and silk and possibility. Mitiyo ki kushbu, ya high, to zinda hone, ki smell high. Summer's illusions try to arrive early. They say, forget the rope, forget the stormbox, we'll never see 40 below again. You smile like you're listening to a child, promise they'll Always be careful. The truth is quieter and older. Summer is rehearsal, not amnesia. You cut willow slips for a future shelter belt and heal them in. You mend the schoolhouse storm boxes and put them back by the door in April, not November. You teach the kid who thinks whiteouts are stories to tie toothpaste knots blindfolded in a warm room with laughter, so his hands don't learn panic when the world shrinks to an arm's length. You schedule winter school for September now, right? It on the meeting house board today, because good habits deserve the prime shelf. Inside, spring cleans more than dust. You pull quilts to the line and watch them turn bright on a blue day. The house looks like it's smiling with cloth teeth. The stove gets a polite dismissal banked low. Doors open, its mouth scrubbed until it shines like wet stone. The vestibule becomes a mud catcher again instead of a life support. PEGS for mitts get a new row labeled rain hats. You rearrange furniture by inches, not because fashion demands it, but because rooms remember, and you want them to remember the new paths you cut, not the old ruts you survived. Community rituals shift gears. The common fuel pile, that ugly pyramid of salvation, shrinks on purpose. What remains gets tarped and logged. A new ledger opens alongside it. Common seed. Lines fill with names and shares. Len beet seed to packets. Hansen flour corn, saved true. Dakota. Family sunflower. 3 hands, teach spacing. A different kind of winter insurance is being written. One that turns August into jars and crocks you can stack like confidence. In the corner, the Pemmican crew trades tips with the sausage crew. The kraut ladies mark a barrel with chalk and a date like it's a prayer, and then the reckoning no ledger can hold. What did the hard months teach you about you? The answers are small and sharp. You learned you talk too much when the rope is in your hand, and not enough when smoke lies too. The ceiling. You learned your pride likes pretty windows more than it likes warm ears. And you moved the bed away from the north wall and stopped arguing. You learned that systems beat heroics 99 nights out of 100. And 100th night belongs to someone who taught you in a language older than your house. You learned to say, "Teach me," without swallowing the words. Respect has a face now. The Lakota elder who told you to turn your door south gets the first jar of jam in June without anyone pretending it's charity. The woman whose mitten pattern saved 4 fingers gets your last decent needle and a new line of waxed thread. Knowledge has moved from favor to infrastructure. That's the frontier at its smartest. Gratitude turned into schedules and pegs and ropes and hats. You also learned which stories to keep telling. The teacher with the rope, yes. The man who tried to outrun a whiteout and didn't. The night the chimney sang and you almost clapped until the pastor's wife smacked the pipe with a flat voice that's not music. The rules that worked, jar pours out on the table, pebbles like a small grey river. Kids push them into little piles. Rope knots, stove scents, mittens, not gloves. Sauerkraut saves teeth. Bank snow, not pride. To vents, not one. They chant them, like a game and then like a spell. That's what culture is here. The chants we use to cheat death out of an easy meal. Thor also brings the luxury of long tasks. You can sharpen saws, not because a storm demands it, but because August will. You can repair the meeting house bench that caught 3 sleeping children during the worst week and deserves to hold 3 dancing ones in June. You can sit, honest to God. Sit on a warm step with a cup that has more taste than temperature, and trace with your thumb the groove in the doorframe where 100 mitts grabbed in a hurry and lived. For a moment, Allow a glance outward beyond the settlement, beyond the century. Tum Jo, sun Rei Ho, RB, wrapped up. Phone glowing in a safe room. You're living inside a miracle those people paid for. Your water doesn't freeze in a bucket. Your light doesn't smoke your ceiling. Your heat doesn't lie in blue and gold. Flames on dung, but the physics are still true. Food is time. Air needs a plan. Routines calm storms inside skulls. Neighbors keep you from making February decisions in February. If you ever forget, you already know the voice you'll need to borrow. The one that says, rope, not rush. Mittens, not macho. Systems, not speeches. So, we close here, not with trumpets, but with chores that turned into confidence. The house you built is still small. The winter ahead will still be large, but you've raised the price winter has to pay to hurt you. You strung ropes at hand height. You taught kids to tie knots with eyes closed. You listened to teachers the Prairie had before wagons. You turned near misses into fixtures. You wrote mercy down so it wouldn't evaporate. You told your pride to wear a hood and face south. Evening arrives like a friend who knocks softly. The yard is wet and honest. A bird makes a noise so surprised it sounds like laughter. Inside, someone ladles stew onions and the last of the cellar potatoes and a handful of spring onions cut too small to brag about. Bread tears the way it should. The stove ticks in that satisfied way of iron cooling after a job well done. Quilts are lighter tonight. Sleep will come quickly if you let it. Before lamps go down, you stand in the vestibule a moment and look at the door. It held. The rope on its peg is coiled, neat, ready, not nervous. Your hand finds the groove in the frame where you learned to move slowly in mean weather. You breathe deep, once, twice Dean Sands, highs, hum, Sakaya, thand, let the air go. All the way to your feet. And for the last time in this long winter tale, I'll say it plain, you made it. Not because you were the toughest soul the Prairie ever saw, but because you were teachable, because you traded secrets instead of guarding them, because you counted pebbles and jars and paths and mercies and made them add up to spring. That's the whole story. That's the lesson worth carrying forward. A.B. Light, Lo Cardu. Blanket, Saikaro. Akan Band. Outside, the last small icicle lets go. Inside, the house settles. Tomorrow will smell like mud and work and, if we're lucky, a little bit of coffee. For now, Aram say so, jow warm and safe knowing winter's hardest pages have been turned, and the next book on your table is already open to green. Asterisk.